This meeting to order. This is the 65th meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance. We have two.
Le Comité des Finances.
I want to thank our officials our witnesses for waiting for us. I apologize for the vote tonight. We have, during our first panel, 5 organizations presenting. We have, first of all, BCE Incorporated in Bell Canada. We have the Communications, Energy and Paper Workers Union of Canada. We have Mobilicity. We have Public Mobile. And we have Wind Mobile. Welcome to all of you. You'll each have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement, and then we'll have questions from all members, and we'll start with Bell Canada, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Je vous remercie de cette occasion de présenter le point de vue.
Thank you for this opportunity to allow us to present Bell's views on Bill C-38. The government has said these changes, along with the proposed rules for the next spectrum auction, have 3 objectives. First, sustain competition in wireless telecommunications services. Second, robust investment and innovation in this sector. And third, availability of advanced services for all Canadians, including those in rural areas.
We have 3 major national carriers with the scale to offer advanced wireless services, including the latest HSPA Plus and LTE technologies to 97% of Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Including the new entrants, many of which are here today, major Canadian cities such as Toronto, Montreal, and Edmonton have no less than 5 wireless providers and up to 11 different brands to choose from. Even the U.S. can't claim such a level of competition, and the same is true in most countries. In fact, Bell's service plans for the Apple iPhone and the Apple iPad are cheaper than AT&T's. Another major reason Canada is a world leader is the almost $20 billion in wireless capital expenditures Bell, Rogers, and TELUS have invested since 2003, generating more than $40 billion in total economic value annually and employment for almost 300,000 Canadians. As far as coverage is concerned, consider this. PEI received 4G high-speed wireless services in 2009, before Chicago. It's no wonder many countries view Canada's wireless industry with envy. Many countries also have a similar opinion of Canada's banking system, and we justifiably take great pride in that now. But there was a time not so long ago when many thought we had serious problems with our banks. Recent history has proven those views incorrect. The same is true of our wireless industry. So Bill C-38 is a solution in search of a problem. And, coupled with aspects of the proposed spectrum auction rules, it opens a Pandora's box of unintended consequences, including negative impacts on Canadian consumers, especially in rural areas. Under C-38, all foreign ownership restrictions would be lifted on telecom carriers with less than a 10% share of national telecom revenues. This will create a 2-tier capital structure in Canada's telecom market, with one set of rules applying only to Bell, Rogers, and TELUS, and another applying to all our competitors, including recent domestic entrants or foreign companies seeking to enter. These changes, together with the proposed auction rules, clear the way for any foreign giant to acquire 2 blocks of prime 700 megahertz spectrum, while Canada's national carriers, those who invest billions in all areas of the country, urban and rural, are limited to just 1 block. And what does Canada get in return? Mr. Chairman, can you imagine the U.S. government ever allowing Bell Canada to have more privileged access to U.S. spectrum than companies like AT&T and Verizon? Can you imagine the U.S. ever implementing such a 2-tier capital structure that gives special advantages to foreign companies over domestic carriers? Don't think we can. Yet that's exactly what C-38 and the auction rules will do here in Canada. And foreign companies who enter will be able to skim the cream from Canada's largest, most lucrative markets. Will executives in Texas or Germany invest first in Edmonton, Canada's 5th largest market, or Phoenix, the 5th largest in the U.S. with twice the population? Hamilton, Canada's 8th largest market, or San Diego, the 8th largest market in the U.S. with more than twice the population? Or Rimouski, Canada's 72nd largest market, rather than Buffalo, the 70th largest in the U.S. with almost 8 times the population. Worse still, these entrants will have no obligation to serve rural areas. None. Okay. It would be a mistake to assume that Canada's national wireless carriers are impervious to such advantages being given to foreign companies. These advantages can and should be avoided given the thriving competitive market we have in Canada today, and there are two ways to achieve this. First, Bill C-38 could be amended to increase levels of permissible foreign direct ownership for all Canadian telecom and broadcasting companies to 49% from the current 20%. Second, at a minimum, the government must adjust its spectrum auction rules to reduce the risk of unintended consequences. This can be achieved by ensuring all bidders for spectrum are subject to the same spectrum caps in the event large foreign companies enter the auction, rather than rules that give those massive foreign companies a 2-to-1 spectrum cap advantage. Tous les Canadiens tirent l'avantage d'une industrie.
All Canadians benefit from a strong and innovative Canadian-owned communications industry. To give large foreign companies special advantages over our own puts this at risk, and that is neither sound public policy nor in the public interest. Thank you.
Votre présentation. We're going to
Thank you for your presentation.
go next to Mr. Coles, please, for your presentation.
Great. Thank you very much. I do appreciate the opportunity to present to you. I am Dave Coles, the National President of the Communications, Energy, and Paper Workers Union, and we represent approximately 40,000 workers who work in all aspects of telecommunications for many employers. Our primary message to the government today and to this committee is that we are diametrically opposed to this kind of change to the telecommunications regulations being thrust into an omnibus bill. You heard the representation from Bell and the amount of capital that's expended. It's a very serious issue. The sale of spectrum is complicated and not easily done. Are presented to you in 5 minutes. The total sum, unless there's a paragraph or so or a page or so missing, this is the total that's in the bill. This little piece of paper, that's it. This is far too serious. You need to break it out and deal with this. This is a huge economic driver for our country. It has a great impact on business, the economy, jobs, culture, whole wide range of issues can be dealt with, but they can't be dealt with when it's buried inside a bill like this. And when you look at the 10% rule, there is no rules on the 10% rule. What does it mean? Well, MTS is less than 10%. Carlos Sims could buy MTS with pocket change, the richest man in the world who owns many, many telephone companies, can buy MTS with all of its integrated services and compete directly against Canadian companies with no restriction. They're not limited then about the amount of money. They could buy, if Bell was to allow it, the independent company called Bell Alliant, less than 10% of the market, full basis of services. You can get a foreign company, buy a complete telephone company in Canada, and then have no restrictions. And if you say there are restrictions, where are they? They're not here. So I would just plead with you that you need to break it out and bring it in as a piece of legislation, and let's have a national discussion on what's in the best interest of Canada and the economy and our culture. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We will now go to Mr. Wong, please, for your presentation.
Thank you very much for inviting us today. On behalf of Mobility, I, Gary Wong, am very pleased to be present to submit this presentation today. I'd like to start off a little bit to give Mobility's perspective as to some of the challenges, some of the difficulties of a small company, a small carrier starting up in Canada. As you may know, Mobility was one of the several new entrants that entered into the market for the supply of wireless telephone messaging and data services in Canada. For $243 million, Mobility obtained spectrum in the AWS auction in 2008 and its entry ticket to compete in the Canadian wireless industry. Many more millions of dollars, and a few years later, Mobility now serves Ottawa, Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, and Edmonton. Not different from other startup companies, Mobility had to overcome many challenges before it sees success. misinformed consumers that are locked into legacy contracts with outrageous termination fees, incumbents that create flanker brands or gave their existing flanker brands a complete makeover just to avoid competing with us head-to-head and using their main brand. Mandatory regulations such as roaming and tower sharing that did not transpire exactly as planned because of mandatory rules but negotiated terms, just to name a few. Spectrum and capital are another two common challenges that wireless startup faces. How do we ensure that we acquire enough spectrum to, one, minimize any capacity issue with respect to our customers, and two, to enable us to build our own next big thing, commonly known as the LTE. The same way that the incumbent had already have done so from the extra spectrum that they have acquired or were gifted years ago. Indeed, how do we scream above the loud voices of the incumbents who keeps on telling people that they need more spectrum to meet capacity needs, when in fact they already hold more spectrum than most other carriers in the world? If spectrum is the real estate land that one acquires in order to build the beachfront hotel, then one must raise enough capital to construct and promote this beachfront hotel. Millions of dollars are required to purchase spectrums, build networks, build IT systems, and market the brand, just to name a few. I would like to mention that these millions of dollars must all be spent before mobility see a single dollar of revenue in return. Then, after mobility starts receiving revenue from its customers, millions of additional dollars are then required to purchase more spectrum, expand and build a faster network, improve capabilities of the IT systems, and more marketing and promotions. This only illustrates the capital intensiveness of the wireless business and the challenges mobility faces as David battles 3 Goliaths on a day-to-day basis. Mobility therefore supports with open arms the changes to the foreign ownership rules. Easing foreign ownership restrictions can potentially make capital raising easier or potentially decrease some of the cost to capital. These two benefits are almost unique only to new entrants when compared with incumbent carriers that already have unfettered access to low-cost capital through either their many revenue streams, their bank accounts, or the abundance of lower-risk capital investors domestically. Indeed, due to the higher risk of new entrants, a startup business, it is only logical to expect that the cost of borrowing for new entrants are to be higher than those of incumbents. If easing foreign ownership can lower the interest of borrowing or the cost of capital by $1 for mobility, then this one extra dollar that mobility can use, this is one extra dollar that mobility can use elsewhere to lower plan costs, improve the network, or bring better quality services to Canadians. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. We'll now hear from Mr. Kirby, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, honorable members. I'll try to be relatively brief. I mean, we're here to support the changes in the legislation that's in the Bill C-38. Capital is critical to building a new wireless company in Canada, as Mr. Wong just said. I can agree with most of what he said. I mean, the two key ingredients for creating a competitive environment in the wireless industry are exactly that. It's capital and it's spectrum. This is one critical component of improving the situation for capital to support investment in these companies. Progress has been made, and I won't get into the debate here on whether or not how much has been accomplished on the spectrum side, but certainly in the last auction, through the set-aside, the government created an environment that allowed new entrants to take place. I mean, the fact that 3 of us are sitting here today is an example of the fact that that's been an accomplishment. The fact that you have Videotron operating along with us in Quebec as new entrants is an accomplishment of that policy, and it's something that came about. But capital continues to be important, and there's a real challenge in Canada with getting access to risk capital. We have an immature market for capital. And it's not just a matter of wireless innovation or wireless investment, but it's a matter of generally innovation in the knowledge economy and IT and broader sectors in Canada. The fact that the set of institutional investors that are very strong in the U.S., that are very strong in some other markets, are weaker in Canada for historical reasons. And a number of steps are being taken to address that. But a big step that can help in this case, which isn't an issue with some of those other areas, is enabling capital to come in and investment to come in from foreign companies and foreign investors outside the country. And that's valuable because when foreigners invest in new entrants like ours, they invest in new entrants like ours. They invest in Canada. Every single employee at Public Mobile is in Ontario and Quebec. This has nothing to do with the ownership structure. It has to do with the fact that our customers are in Ontario and Quebec, and our networks are in Ontario and Quebec because that's where our licenses are. And that will continue independent of who actually ultimately owns the investment and equity in the company. That's where they're going to stay because that's where our business is and where it happens. To the extent we're able to attract additional further investment from investors from outside the country, that investment's coming in to provide jobs and to build infrastructure in Ontario and Quebec, where we operate today. That is all to the benefit of Canada, independent of who ultimately owns the company. And it's something that is not only bringing more competition to Canadians and more choice to Canadian consumers, but is bringing additional jobs and so on in Canada, all of which is a benefit to Canada. I always find it fascinating when Bell stands up and says this is bad because all these scary things will happen. Well, Bell opposed competition in long distance because it was going to be bad for Canadians. They opposed competition in local because it would be bad for Canadians. They opposed steps to improve access to Internet access by competition because it would be bad for Canadians. They opposed setting aside spectrum in the last auction because it would be bad for Canadians. They opposed setting aside or using caps to improve access to spectrum in this auction, the auction coming up, because it would be bad for Canadians. And they've opposed better access to foreign capital for smaller new entrants because they say it would be bad for Canadians. In every case, they have failed because ultimately the outcome has been good for Canadians in the sense that in all of those sectors, there's been more competition, better pricing, more options to Canadians, and ultimately more employment ultimately from new entrants that have come into these markets. For all those reasons, I think the bill should be supported as it stands.
Thank you, Mr. Kirby. We'll hear from Mr. Lockie, please.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, good afternoon or evening, I suppose, at this point. I'm not working from prepared material, so I hope you'll take my apology if I meander a little bit. I just wanted to acknowledge that we're in support of the bill. We think that this is a critical, important precondition to fostering competition in an industry that is in dire need of it. So we applaud the government for taking this initiative. The WIN's position in this area, as I'm sure you all know, has been very publicly kicked around for the last few years, and so we feel that we're sort of specially qualified to talk to some of the negative consequences of the existing legislative regime. The fact that our competitors kind of put us through a regulatory proceeding that ultimately ended in vindication at the Supreme Court level doesn't eliminate the fact that the system allowed that to happen. And it has to be acknowledged, I think, that, as everyone has noted here, that the entirety of fostering competition, apart from some of the, call it, other policy initiatives that have to be undertaken, the AWS set-aside being one example, the recent spectrum policy that Mr. Bivik spoke to, in our view, actually didn't go far enough. But we don't intend to spend time on that today. What we're talking about today is a necessary precondition, which is you need to get capital into this company. And I think it's a critical point just to understand the vast quantities of capital that are required, and also to understand that where that capital comes from, it should be and is irrelevant to government policy considerations. The simple reality is that Canadian capital behind a Canadian company is not going to be deployed to roll out LTE in Parry Sound because that's where Bobby Orr's from. They are going to make commercial decisions based on economic factors, just like a corporation that's funded by foreign capital. I think the government has done a cautious, incremental approach to resolving this issue, but they've done it where it matters most. And that's a conclusion that isn't something that came about in the course of the last couple of months. That's something that the TPR came to. That's something that the Red Wilson report came to. It is a necessary precondition to allowing the kinds of capital that come in. Now, let's just be very clear. This is not a magic bullet. This is not going to solve a massive competition issue in this country. You have an oligopoly with 93% of the market share, a massive brand presence, a massive retail presence, huge amounts of capital. They're snapping up all of the content in the country. Everyone recognizes that there's an issue. It's long been recognized. This doesn't solve it. It's a precondition to solving it. And so, I don't think that there's any credible reason to say we don't want that capital in this country and we're going to artificially constrain the terms upon which it can be invested, because that is a hurdle that simply won't be overcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And we'll start members' questions with Ms. Nash for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much to the witnesses for being here today. I know this is a very complicated subject, and one of the issues that I'm struggling with is it seems that this change is creating different rules for different players in the telecom sector, and I'm concerned that over the long term, some of the smaller operations with less than 10% of the market share can be bought up by foreign corporations and then may have a more dominant position going beyond the 10% threshold. So my question is to Mr. Bibic, am I pronouncing your name properly?
You are.
Can you tell me how these changes in foreign ownership and if I'm perceiving it right, different rules for different players in this sector, what impact could that have on the telecom sector in Canada?
Okay, so when we take a step back and try to, we appreciate and understand kind of the balancing act that the government had to put in place here. So on the one hand, rules were set up in 2008 to allow for new entry, and we have three examples of that here. And the government wanted to make sure that that can continue, the conditions can continue to be in place so that they can continue to operate. And the government's really looking for a fourth national carrier, as you can tell from Minister Paradis' testimony yesterday at the Senate. So on the one hand, trying to do that, they thought one way to do it is to lift the foreign ownership rules for small players. And if that's the goal, then we say, okay, then let's treat all players the same rather than create the two-tier capital structure. So that's one example of an asymmetry. Then the government also wanted, based on the statements of the minister and the policy, to ensure incumbents could continue to bid on spectrum and continue to invest massively as we have. And that was addressed by allowing us to bid on the upcoming spectrum auction, so we certainly don't quarrel with that. And then the third thing the government wanted to accomplish is to make sure there was investment in rural areas. The one gap, though, and I don't quarrel with any of those objectives, but the one gap is the way it was done. If 10%, or if you have 10% or below revenue share, you can come in as a foreign. Well, if you have 10% or below revenue share, there are no foreign ownership restrictions, which means a company like AT&T, which obviously today has zero revenue share, could come in from scratch. And it's a massive organization with...
Let me just pursue that. Mr. Lockie, as I understand it, the financial backer of Wind is Vimpelcom. Have I got that right? Which is one of the largest global wireless services with over 200 million subscribers and quarterly revenues 5 times larger than those of Bell. So I'm wondering, what is it about the current structure that doesn't work for you when clearly you do have access to capital?
Thank you. It's a fair question. The short answer is that the capital that was invested at the early stage of this company's history, which is actually a RASCOM, which has since been acquired by Vimpelcom, was intended to be short-term, very expensive capital with a view to bringing on third-party capital. To a limited extent, we've been successful doing that with vendor financing and so on. The challenge is the terms and the cost of that capital. It's very, very difficult. It's very simple, once you've lived it for a while, but I appreciate you have to understand that the more expensive your capital is, the more challenging it is to make a return on that investment. And as that becomes less and less kind of palatable, then you have more and more trouble bringing in that capital. So I think that the way I would characterize it is that we had a compelling investment proposition at the early stage, given that there's an enormous opportunity in Canada because there has been no competition for so long that it's desperate for it, and we want to be that fourth national alternative. So we were able to raise capital on that basis. However, continuing to do so is simply not feasible. We're talking about massive amounts of capital, and that's the issue.
30 seconds. I just wanted to raise the issue that was raised by the Department of Public Safety over security concerns when loosening foreign ownership with the Chinese firm Huawei coming into Canada, what impact that would have on Canada's public safety and security. That's one question, and whether there's reciprocity with other countries. Are they opening their telecom similarly to as we're doing in Canada? And I don't know if anyone wants to take that.
Someone who can just address it briefly, and then we can come back to it in a further.
Right. So on the second one, our fundamental quarrel is this. So companies large as AT&T or as large as Verizon could come in and bid for 2 blocks of prime spectrum that will be put up for bid next year, whereas Bell is capped at bidding for 1 block. And we ask ourselves, well, why would we set up a condition where companies like that could bid for more spectrum than us? If we make a policy decision to allow them to enter, okay, but then let everyone compete for the same amount of spectrum.
I can actually answer the question.
Yeah, I'll just allow this, and then if I could ask members to allow enough time for the witnesses to respond. But Mr. Lockie?
I can be very brief. To answer your question, on the second point, this issue of the spectrum being set aside, it's actually a cap system. The incumbents have access to 75% of the good stuff. There's very little left over. What I would just observe is that it is a bit rich to cry poor about the access in this upcoming auction, given that the incumbents have collectively about almost 400 megahertz. Everyone else in the universe in Canada has about 45 megahertz. So you still have a long way to go before you can start worrying too much about that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nash. Mr. Hoback, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here this evening. I come from Saskatchewan, so of course this auction in SaskTel has a general excitement about it because the type of megahertz, the 700 megahertz scale, and what it can do and how it can penetrate in rural areas of Saskatchewan is substantial, if not huge. And I know they're very excited and trying to figure out how they can participate in the auction, and they're very excited to see this move forward because they want to get established and get moving fairly quick too. One of the things that has been talked about in Mr. Parady's March 14th speech was the sharing of towers and the sharing of roaming. I guess maybe I'll go to you, start with you, Mr. Bipik. One of the complaints that I would have coming from Saskatchewan is we've seen some of the companies are very more than happy to set up services in large centers where there's population, but not so happy to do it in areas where there's less population but growth because of mining or other activities that are going on in the region. So when it comes to tower sharing, what do you see steps that you'll be guys been doing to improve the wireless service in rural Canada? What steps will you be taking, I guess, in regards to that? And how do you view the tower sharing policy that's coming forward?
So Bell takes our rural coverage extremely seriously. And in 2009, when we launched our new network that put Canada at the forefront in terms of wireless technology, we covered 96% of the Canadian population. That was with a technology called HSPA+. So 96% covers thousands and thousands of small towns and cities in the country. And there's a new technology now called LTE, long-term evolution, and we started deploying that. We're at about 16 communities, and we want, after this auction is done for 700 megahertz, to accomplish the same thing, cover 96% or more of the Canadian population. So of the companies here today, we're the ones who are delivering the rural broadband to rural areas. The point that I keep harping on is if somebody like AT&T comes in, the way the auction is designed, they would have absolutely zero obligation if they won spectrum, zero obligation to hit any rural areas. And, of course, they hit the urban markets first. So, again, if we're going to allow them to come in, let's just create an environment where it allows for open bidding and the market to deliver the auction outcomes that we want. As far as tower sharing, there are rules in place that the government has, and we respect those rules. And to the extent there are disputes between providers about sharing space, then that can be arbitrated through private arbitration under the current rules.
When you look at rural Canada, when you look at you, Mr. Wong, and what you're doing, and your company seems to be sticking to major centers, major population points, how will tower sharing in that work for you guys? And will that be something you'll be taking advantage of?
First of all, we're completely and utterly in support of tower sharing. I think tower sharing is one of the ways in order for to make rural build-out make sense. If take the easiest example, if building a tower in a rural area where there is less densely populated costs $100, and it would take that one person 1 year in terms of revenue to cover this. If someone else was to share the tower and rent out the space, the person who provides the tower, say, for example, if it was Bell, would get revenue quicker because they would be receiving rent. And so their rate of return would actually be quicker and earlier, and they would actually get their money back quicker. So, I see no reason why there shouldn't be tower sharing, and, I think, tower sharing is completely aligned with rural build.
Mr. Lorky, you talked about capital requirements, and of course it is a capital-intensive sector that you're in. In the budget with the changes we made here, is it going to make it easier for the capital requirements to be met and for further expansion into rural areas, for example?
Unquestionably. I mean, I can talk about tower sharing until 7:30 if people want to. But what I'll say is, removing the restrictions as proposed isn't going to solve the tower sharing issue. And the truth is, capital is required. How you deploy that capital is a luxury to figure out once you've got it, and you can't get it on reasonable terms under the existing rules. And so that's really what we're trying to resolve. And I spoke earlier about how this isn't a magic bullet, and it's not. What I would observe is that whether or not you are backed by Canadian money or backed by American money, your decisions on where you deploy and where you see that you can make a return on your investment are identical. So I frankly think the only connection here is a net positive, which is you have more capital in the country, and people are going to find a way to get a return on that capital. And rural, obviously, isn't as quick a return as an urban center. So that's where people are going to focus initially. But people are making rational economic decisions, and that doesn't matter, or rather, it doesn't matter where the capital behind those decisions comes from.
Chair, I'll
Okay.
keep there.
Thank you, Mr. Hoback. Mr. Sims, please.
Thanks for having me here.
Always glad to have you.
Yeah. I'm new here, basically. When you talk about the restrictions, you talk about bellhead restrictions, and when it comes to many things, and obviously more so than the others, you have, with this 10%, for those of you getting less than 10% of the revenue, you now have that ability to grow beyond that 10% with not the same restrictions as you. Is that correct? Am I correct in saying that?
Correct. Well, in the sense that Bell, under the rules, will never be able to
Right.
have foreign capital beyond the current limitations of 20% direct foreign investment, whereas my colleagues here will be able to be 100% foreign-owned.
So lifting that to 49% alleviates a lot, but it doesn't alleviate everything. Because is the potential here that they're going to be as big a name in this business as you?
Well, if AT&T comes in and buys all of them,
Sure.
then the answer is yes. In fact, 10 times bigger.
Okay. So
And the quarrel isn't with that. The quarrel is in that environment, why should Bell be limited to one block, whereas those behemoths get to spectrum blocks? That's the issue that I'm putting forward today.
okay, you look like you're about to respond.
Yeah, just a question of picking which part. Look, as a practical matter, if AT&T, to use Mr. Bibby's example, was to come in and snap everyone up, they would have 45 megahertz of spectrum relative to the 400 that the oligopoly has. It's not a question of how much capital you have. It's how much spectrum you have, and they're not making any more of it. It's a question of how that gets deployed by the government. Mm-hmm. And so that's the first observation I would make.
Okay. Do you have, are you planning to roll out in rural areas? I want to go back to Mr. Hoback's question here. You say, it's great that you can get a better return when you're tower sharing. But that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to actually get in there, into these markets. I guess, essentially, I'm from a rural riding, and I mean rural. I have a Bell phone, but I can't get yours. Why can't I get yours? Or will I get yours, I should say?
Depends on which riding. No, I mean, so there are two issues around getting to any of these rural areas. One is having the capital to build out the network and make the investment. And the second is having the spectrum. I mean, when Mr. Bibic keeps talking about how we rolled out HSPA to 94%, they did so on spectrum that Bell received not through an open auction, without through any competitive process whatsoever, which is the 800 megahertz spectrum. They were granted by virtue of being an incumbent phone monopoly. And they can use that because it's that spectrum that allows you to build out efficiently those rural areas. And that's why it's been so critical in this debate around the 700 megahertz auction, because this is the first time there's an opportunity for a competitor to those incumbents to get a hold of spectrum that actually allows you to economically build these rural areas. Because the spectrum all of us hold now allow us to get, certainly you can build outside the cities into some of the suburban areas, the smaller towns, but the actual rural areas you can't build as economically as you can with the spectrum that the incumbents are already using and have had for 25 years.
So Mr. Bibic says that he wants to be lifted to 49%. You wouldn't agree with that, would you?
It's a completely meaningless change to the existing set of rules. It would have no effect on the ability to raise capital
Is that
for
what
anybody.
Mr. Locke is saying? Is that why?
Well, yeah, I mean, Bruce is put it exactly right. It is meaningless. Let's be clear. No one wants this change more than we do. No one wants the restrictions to be lifted to allow access to capital. And I say to you, absolutely seriously, don't bother making that change. It changes nothing for us. With all respect, that's why Bell is recommending it. It changes nothing. All it changes is a 20% voting share to a 49% voting share changes nothing. It is, you still have this subjective, sorry? It's about you need spectrum and you need capital. So we also need spectrum or capital to get spectrum, which is a distinction between the incumbents. They got it for free.
Right.
But once you've got it, you have to deploy it, and that's hugely capital intensive.
Mr. Bibic, are there any regulations that compel you to go to rural areas, to do other things, like from the CRTC?
1 minute, Mr. Stevens.
No, but the way the spectrum policy has been designed for the upcoming auction, it says that if any provider has access to 2 blocks of spectrum, either through ownership or through combining with pooling its spectrum with somebody else, then you have an obligation to build to 97% of your existing footprint. So for Bell, that would basically mean all the rural areas. But if you don't have an existing footprint, or if your existing footprint is only Toronto, like, or in Montreal, like my friends, then they have absolutely no rural obligations.
Sir, I just want to clarify one thing. When you say all the rural areas, what Mr. Bibic means is all the rural areas where you already have coverage. So nothing incremental to that.
That means Bell is everywhere today, so it's 97% of everywhere, and my friends are in Toronto, Montreal, and it means 97% of Toronto, Montreal, so no rural obligation.
That's what I'm trying to drill down to here, which is the fact that I know that he's in my area, but you're not. Can I expect someday to receive a great amount of competition in my one rural area where they are and you're not? That's all I'm asking. Ooh.
Briefly, we will build out rurally when the economic case for it exists, and that is something that can only happen if there's access to capital and the attendant policy decisions that allow us to succeed and flourish so that we can expand, and that's what competition is you look for opportunities for growth.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Ms. McLeod, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I have to make a quick observation. Enjoying the back and forth of the sort of smaller and the bigger proponents is very not unlike politics, so I guess it's in terms of what we get to enjoy on a regular basis in terms of very different debate, but very sort of, I think, important perspectives that you're bringing to the table, so I do appreciate the perspectives you're bringing. Now, I have to say, and maybe I'll ask Mr. Coles just as a quick, I mean, one of the things that, first of all, I represent a rural riding, but even if you were only representing an urban riding, one of the biggest complaints that I think people get all the time is the cost. And one of the things, of course, that we're trying to do is move towards some competition. And, you know, I understand that the costs in even our urban areas are very, very significant. So do you not believe Canadians should pay lower prices for their access, and why or why not?
We have done extensive research, which are not in these documents because of the restriction you have. There's no evidence that any of this discussion going on, that competition will generate lower rates. Everyone wants gooder. Everyone wants better service and lower rates. but worldwide, show us apples to apples, oranges to oranges. For example, I get this for free. In Europe, you pay $600. You add that into your phone bill, tilt, all of a sudden their rates are higher than ours. And there's scads of evidence on that. So I would be cautious that this debate, which I am enjoying, which leads to my argument that it should be larger and not part of the budget bill.
So I guess I would go to get some feedback from some of the other folks at the table here. Any comments in terms of that particular issue?
I don't want to hog the mic, but I'm happy to speak to it. In my view, prices here are, you've already started to see the impact of competition. And I could sit here and argue for the proposition that competition creates lower prices, more innovation. I don't think that that's even debatable. I think people recognize that. And so I won't spend a lot of time on it. What I will say is, even with our modest presence in the market, we've been in since late 2009. We have about 450,000 subscribers. We're in 5 major urban centers. You're already seeing a dramatic price impact. And that is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, the way it works, and it's very simple to think of it this way, is once you've established a real network footprint and a retail presence, and the incumbents look at that and say, we've got ARPUs, average revenue per user, up around, call it $57, $60. So that's per user. Our ARPUs are down around the $27, $28 range. So you do the math. If they want to compete with us, once we kind of get a level playing field, they're going to have to come down in price. And so that's something that terrifies them, because every dollar of ARPU they go down, it costs them about $500 million in enterprise value. So there's no amount that they won't spend to stop that competition, to slow it down, to continue with the kinds of obstacles that have allowed them to establish themselves as an oligopoly. And these foreign ownership rules are the primary one.
Okay. So my next question is representing a rural area or a large section of rural area. We know that maybe there's 96% coverage, but I think probably I'm missing about 10 to 15% coverage. Through this kind of spectrum auction, is there any opportunity that it ever becomes, I think it's the satellite companies that are moving into those one-offs in the very, very remote places? Does this provide any opportunities for them in terms of, or is there nothing that will, get that last 3%?
The last 3% in the most remote areas will ultimately need to be served via satellite, but up to the 97%, if we want. And wireline fiber internet is obviously being offered by multiple companies in the urban and suburban areas. But if we want that coverage, it's going to be through wireless broadband using LTE technology, which offers phenomenally high speeds. And those who will deliver that service to 97% of the country are the national players who are putting a lot of capital in the ground and employing tens of thousands of people, the Bells, the Rogers, and the Teluses. And as for pricing, just give you an example. These are facts on the ground, not price rhetoric that we read in the newspapers. Facts on the ground, verified today in advance of coming here. If you look at AT&T's iPad plan for a fairly decent chunk of data usage, $50. The very same plan, Bell Canada, $35. Significantly cheaper here in Canada than in the U.S.
So when all my people come back from the States and tell me that they've had this cell phone that they're paying significantly less for, I should sort of wonder if that's about the accuracy.
Misperceptions offered through, based on empty rhetoric, basically ivory tower papers. The fact is, if you take an iPhone now, not an iPad, but an iPhone, and you compare the exact same number of minutes and the exact same wireless internet plan for AT&T, $90, for Bell Canada, $85.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ensuite, Madame Leblanc, s'il vous plaît, pour 5 minutes.
Madame Leblanc, you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much. As a member of the Industry Committee, I would like to have heard you speaking at the Industry Committee rather than at a subcommittee of Finance when we were looking at these communications questions. In the government's orientation leading to the rule the rules which will regulate the auction. Now, it's been mentioned that there is an aim of improving competition to lower prices to consumers. This seems to be one of the objectives. And I think another objective, which all good governments, which represent not just the urban areas, but also the rural areas, that there should be good reasons or encouragement to companies to serve not just rural regions, but the most remote regions. Do you think that the rules which are being established at the present time would meet these objectives, these policy objectives?
Mon Dieu, on pourrait commencer par Monsieur Kirby.
Perhaps Mr. Kirby would like to start.
I mean, the challenge in trying to support services in rural areas is, as we've been discussing, which is that you have to have the capital to build out, and you have to have access to adequate spectrum that allows you to efficiently serve those areas. I mean, Bell and others have been able to do so because they've had many, many years in which to build out, and they've had many, many years of profits coming out of other businesses as well to help them build that, and they've had spectrum that favors that. We don't have that situation yet. This is one step in getting us better access to capital. There's still work that needs to be done to get better access to spectrum that supports building those areas.
Par contre, dans les règles...
In the rules which have been presented, are there encouragements, incentives for people who obtain this spectrum? Are there incentives to build out their services at a reasonable price, not a two-level system, but for the outlying areas as well?
The reality is I don't think that the recently released policy will achieve anything in respect of covering areas that don't already have coverage. That's by definition, because the so-called rural build requirement requires you only to cover your existing HSPA plus footprint. So that's just a straightforward description of what the policy does. I want to be clear that Wind Mobile going up to the policy was on record in the media and when meeting people in Ottawa. We were in support of meaningful rural build-out requirements. It's a cost that you incorporate into buying the spectrum. I mean, if buying the spectrum required you to set a big pile of money on fire every month, then that would just be incorporated into the cost of the spectrum. The difference being that doesn't achieve any policy objectives. So we were on record saying we support those types of restrictions. Now, having said that, I just want to observe that, in my view, it's not the most efficient way to get a rural build going. I mean, and this is veering off topic considerably, in my view, from the foreign ownership question, which is about access to capital for smaller companies. That said, what I will say is that the types of measures that actually you require people to do it, or else you incent them to do it. And the policy that was recently announced doesn't do either with respect to areas that don't already have coverage.
30 seconds.
Oh, 30 seconds left. Do you think that it would be important for the government and Canada for us to have a numerical strategy so we can participate in the digital sphere as such, so that all Canadians can benefit from this digital economy? Mr. Cole?
The whole issue of the digitalization of telecommunications is what created this opening in spectrum. You don't have analog television anymore. And so the whole concept of where you're going to supply services, I think, requires restrictions or incentives that would allow rural communities to have access to high-speed internet, whether that is through this or through copper or through whatever. But I think this is a very complicated question you asked, and it doesn't come in a 5-second answer.
Okay, thank you. Merci, madame. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Mr. Van Kesteren, please.
For the sake of Madame LeBlanc and I think everybody else in the committee, I want to ask everybody here, how long have you been familiar with this process? How many times have you been called up to committee? And I'm referring to industry, for instance. This is not the first time. This is not just sprung on you. Was it Maxime Bernier, I think, when he was minister? Mr. Bibick?
The foreign ownership issue, the latest incarnation of foreign ownership issue started in 2010 when then Minister Clement initiated a consultation. I certainly appeared at Industry Committee in 2010.
Did we not touch on this, much of the same issues with Mr. When Minister Bernier was minister back in 2006?
Foreign ownership didn't come up.
Maybe not foreign ownership, but I mean, much of what we're talking about, the competition and all those things. So
well, in terms of competition, telecom generally, and deregulation and those kinds of issues, but that was more about traditional home phone deregulation, primarily.
Basically, what we're
oh, for sure.
Trying to accomplish. Wouldn't it stand to reason that if you suspected that, because I think we were interrupted by the first time by an election, I think the second time by election, I think the illustrious chair was, I served in committee with him when we went through this whole process. Mr. Rajat would remember those as well, too, better than I would.
2003.
2000, oh, there you go, 2003. So wouldn't it stand to reason that if you knew that this was possibly coming down the pipe, that you could prove to the government that indeed these were unnecessary changes and would be harmful, and as such we wouldn't see a need for any more competition?
Well, okay, so I have 4 quick points in answer to that. Number one,
because I got a few more.
Yeah, very quick. Number one is the proposal that Bell put forward in 2010 to lift the rules to 49%. Rather than adopt this 10% rule, was the option that was supported by the majority of interveners in 2010.
Can I stop for just a second, though? Because and your suggestion is that you'll have a tough time competing against the large multinationals like in the States.
Well, I don't want my point to be misunderstood. It's this on spectrum. Right now, as the spectrum policy is designed, Bell is capped at 1 block of spectrum, and my friends get an opportunity to bid for 2.
But
and
you got most of the spectrum. You got lots of spectrum.
Hold on. We don't have, but sir, we don't have a quarrel with that. That's what I want to say. So I don't want to debate that with you. The fact that they get to bid for 2 and we get to bid for 1, I'm not quarreling with. We're okay with that. We can live with that. We're happy with that. Here's the issue. If through the 10% foreign ownership restriction rule, then massive companies like AT&T and Verizon come in, that's okay too. But all we're saying is, in that event, then let us bid for 2, because they'll be allowed to bid for 2. That's the only point we're making.
But wouldn't you agree that, and you said that they can't, the multinationals you're talking about in the States, I think you gave the example that you're much lower than them anyway. So I mean you've got the home turf. You've been here. Like I just don't see that argument happening.
Ms. Frank, if you look at the exhibit to my opening statement, the prime blocks of spectrum are blocks 2, 3, 6, and 7. AT&T could buy 2, they'll buy 2 and 3. Verizon can buy 2, they'll buy 6 and 7. That might happen, and we'll say, okay, good, let them go. And where are they going to go? They're going to go to Toronto, to Montreal, to Vancouver. That's where they're going to go. But again, if they're going to come in, we're happy to compete against them, but we want to compete on an equal footing. Why would we put our national champions, Bell, Rogers, and TELUS, put them in the pit with these folks with one hand tied behind our backs? Their market caps are $200 billion. Our market cap is $30 billion. They have 10 times the revenues, and we're saying, fine, if that's the government's policy decision, we can live with that, but we want an opportunity to bid for the same amount of spectrum. And again, I have no quarrel with my friends on this panel, the fact that they have an opportunity to bid for 2 blocks, and we have an opportunity to bid for 1. Peace on that.
Okay, I'm going to give Mr. Lockey just a chance to respond.
Just a short response.
Thanks. So very quickly on that, I think a lot of people probably wouldn't think it was a bad idea if AT&T did come up here. But the simple reality is what we're talking about, what Mr. Bibich is talking about, is 5 megahertz paired of spectrum. They have close to 400 megahertz of spectrum. So AT&T is not rubbing its hands together at the prospect of trying to compete against Bell. The other point I want to make, and it would take us a long time, but I just want to be very clear, the economics, when you already have an oligopoly, when you already have a massive retail presence, when you have a 30-year head start, are very different. And just because AT&T's got the money does not mean that it's stupid enough to bid against Bell, Rogers, and TELUS to get the extra block. It simply won't happen. Check it in 2013.
Thank you.
Then if it doesn't happen, my proposed
Thank
fix
you.
does no
Thank
harm.
you. Thank you, Mr. Van Kesteren. Mr. Caron, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you. I have various questions, but I would like to get back to Madame Leblanc, who was talking about the government's objective, as expressed by Mr. Paradis, relates to rural services. 97% of territory covered in, I believe it's 5 years. Do you think that the measures which have been presented here will realize these aims expressed by Mr. Paradis? Mr. Bibic, perhaps? Reply. Well, if we can get the 2 blocks, or if we can get 2 blocks, yes, Bell would be obliged to develop a service for 97% of our territory with LTE wireless service if we get 2 blocks. Mr.
Practical reality is, for Mr. Sims, where he already has Bell coverage, he will get 700 deployed if he happens to be within the 90% of the population coverage within that license area in 5 years, 97 after 10. But again, from just to return to the point, the access to capital that lifting these rules will not solve any rural issue, and the spectrum policy, in my view, has a certain, it does trigger certain consequences to an entity that buys 2 blocks, but it only covers existing HSPA footprint. And let's just be clear, that is mobile broadband. It's not as fast, but you don't have to deploy LTE with 700.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Bibic?
Thank you, Mr. Bibic. You are going to have access only to 1 block, but it was indicated that you do have an advantage along with TELUS and combining blocks. So you could have 2 blocks. Reply. If Bell gets 1 block and TELUS gets 1 block, and then if we agree to share them, then yes, we would be obliged to cover 97% of our territory. So that would be a reply to your first question. If we got 2 blocks and we joined them, yes. Question. So you have this possibility to establish an LTE system which will work. What about Rogers or new entrants? They won't have this opportunity. Well, Rogers, if they bought 2 blocks, or they could get into partnership with my colleagues, with WIN or Videotron Quebec or Shaw in the West, Eastlink in the East. They could enter into a partnership or with TELUS or with Bell. How much time do I have left? Well, I'll just ask one of my questions. There was reference to different rules for new entrants and people already in place. And a new entrant like AT&T might buy 15% of the market, and you at Bell, you would have more or less the same weight, but different rules applying. There is the Broadcasting Act. There's Videotron, and there are various private companies as well, TVA and so on. So what is being proposed by Mr. Paradis, what sort of impact will it have on broadcasting? Perhaps Mr. Coles would have something to say about this.
People thought that the broadcasters were going to own the telephone companies. That's not the case. The telephone companies deliver the product, the pipe, and the receptacle, and create a considerable amount of Canadian good jobs. And a concern of ours is that at foreign ownership, what would be the driver to have any Canadian content on any of the services provided. So there's an issue around culture and around Canadian content as well.
Okay, thank you. Merci. We'll go to Mr. Adler, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I've been listening with great interest with this dialogue. It's a fascinating discussion, and I'm reminded when I was a young boy, and I remember going to the butcher shop with my grandmother, and she picked out she was going to buy a chicken, and she picked out a chicken from behind the sort of the glass, and she told the butcher that's the one that I would like to have, and the butcher said, well, you don't want that one, that has a broken leg, and she said, well, I'm going to eat it, I'm not going to dance with it. So things aren't always as they appear, and what I would like to know, and from the perspective of both Bell and one of the other companies, is paint me a picture here moving forward. What does this mean as far as, not as far as your companies are concerned, but what does this mean for the consumer? Best case scenario and worst case scenario. If we could start with Mr. Bibic.
Best case scenario is each of the national players obtain 700 megahertz spectrum, because while my friends talk about how the three national players have a lot of spectrum compared to them, none of us have 700 megahertz, and 700 megahertz is what we need to deliver national wireless broadband to all small towns and communities in the large centers. So best case scenario is each of the three gets spectrum that they need in order to build national networks and compete against each other, and the new entrants, there's additional spectrum on top of that, and the new entrants get the additional spectrum, and they continue to offer competition. And in terms of a public policy, hopefully they extend to rural areas, because right now they're not there. Worst case scenario is what I indicated, the unintended consequences in my opening statement, that through the loophole that I mentioned, the large behemoths come in with no obligations and an advantage, and then they skim Toronto and Montreal. Bell, Rogers, and TELUS are going to have to deploy all their resources to compete in Toronto and Montreal, and the rural areas are left behind for a very, very long time.
Just before we move on, so under worst case scenario, in terms of potential investment that Bell would make outside of where they would have to compete in the larger urban centers, what would that mean for Bell's potential investment moving forward?
Well, if the large international competitors come into the urban areas, it is absolutely crystal clear that we're going to have to devote all our resources there, because without making the profits in urban areas, can't go to rural areas. And we're going to deploy all our resources there, and we're going to leave the rural areas with what they have today, which is fantastic service, because right now it's world-class service, but in 3 years it's not going to be world-class service, it'll be 2009 service. And that's what the rural areas will have.
Okay, Mr. Kirby or Mr. Lockheed, if you want to.
I could just say it's the opposite of what he said. The best case scenario is you create an ongoing and vibrant competitive environment in the wireless industry in Canada. Mr. Bibic's boogeyman of AT&T coming into Canada isn't bad for Canadian consumers. First of all, AT&T coming in, even if they bought up a whole pile of small players and grew to 10% of the market, they would be 10% of the market against 90% for the incumbents. They would still be a tiny player, relatively speaking. Just because they're big in the U.S. or big elsewhere doesn't make them big within this market. And what matters is how big you are within this market. T-Mobile in the U.S. is controlled by Deutsche Telekom, a bigger European carrier. It doesn't make them any bigger in the U.S. It doesn't make them any more competitive in the U.S. And someone that, whether it was them or anyone else that wanted to come in and make the investment and was able to get a hold of the capital and sufficient 700 megahertz spectrum, they're going to go out and build out these rural areas, because you're ultimately going to want to have a network that covers those areas and allows you to compete with the incumbents. The worst case for Canadian consumers is to go back to where we were in 2008. It is an environment where Canada was the only wireless market in the world where average price per customer went up. Because you had three players that were well balanced at a cozy oligopoly and could protect themselves, and were very careful, in their phrase, to maintain rational pricing all of the time. That's what would happen.
Mr. Bibbich, just going back to you for a second.
Just very briefly.
Okay, very briefly. Comparing Apple phones to Apple phones, you gave us the comparison between Canada and the U.S. and the price comparison is cheaper here and better value here in Canada. Just quick. Banks used to get the bad rap. Why are cell companies now getting the bad rap? I mean, if the empirical evidence is there, what's the problem?
Well, I think the bad rap that wireless companies are getting was particularly bad in 07, 08, 09. I think it's gotten considerably better through a lot of education and the fact that we are world leaders in the technology we offer. And in fact, if you kind of sweep away the empty rhetoric and you look at the facts on the ground, our pricing is very good. Of course, if you ask somebody, would you like to pay less? Everyone in this room will say yes. If you think, do you get good value for your money, they'll say yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Monsieur Maille, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Peut-être, Monsieur Bibbich, vite, rapidement là-dessus, est-ce que vous...
Do you think that by opening up the market as provided for under the bill, will services be improved and will the cost to consumers be reduced? Reply. Well, the market in the United States may be considered more open in the States than it is here, but there are 2 national players in the States and there are 3 in Canada with closed markets. So there's 2 in the States, 3 here. We provide the new LTE service. We provided it before the U.S. Question, do you think prices will go down, and do you think there will be better service if the market is opened up to foreign markets? Well, players like AT&T offer a more expensive service comparable to what's paid in Canada.
There are some issues regarding Canadian culture and also regarding national security. You mentioned that the Telecommunications Act, companies have a responsibility to strengthen and safeguard Canadian culture, and also that telecommunications performs an essential role in the maintenance of Canada's identity and sovereignty. How will this affect that issue?
Well, firstly, you cannot, in my view, delink or separate a telephone company from a broadcast company today. They are one and the same. So if there is an issue, for example, around culture, whether it's Newfoundland or Quebec, what would AT&T or any foreign company have as their driver to continue to develop Canadian culture? So it's the issue about foreign ownership and their view on what Canadian culture or Canadian security is. So one has to question when you have, and they use the word behemoth, but in relative terms, Bell, Rogers are not behemoths in the world agenda. They're not the biggest telephone players by any sight. And I for one, think that a key cultural issue in Canada, security in Canada, should be owned by a Canadian company.
Can you tell us a bit about the past experience in terms of having foreign ownership, in terms of jobs creation or job loss in Canada for Canadian?
We haven't had that experience in Canada, but it is documented in the United States and other places that, and in other industries, by the way, not telecommunications because of the restriction, that immediately things like R&D, head offices of foreign corporations leave Canada. There's a litany of examples taking place right now in this country where that is the case. So I'm concerned, we are concerned, that foreign-controlled companies will not make Canadian jobs a priority.
Why not? What happens in that case?
Well, they move head offices, R&D, to the, if it's Carlos Sims, it moves to Mexico. Why wouldn't it?
And you mentioned that I'll read. The Mulroney government produced a comprehensive telecommunications policy document that argued domestic ownership of Canada's telecommunication infrastructure is essential to national sovereignty and security. Can you maybe expand on that?
Well, it was their report, not ours.
Yeah.
And I think that it has a lot of merit that you would consider a country giving up its right to own its telecommunications system.
And one of the concerns that we also have, I think we spoke about rural areas, but what about also, I think there's a lack of access to high-speed internet service for Aboriginal reserves or First Nation reserves. Can you maybe?
Well, it is about having either by required law or incentive access to places where historically there has not been good service. In Saskatchewan, in Alberta under AGT, they were required, before they became federally certified, to supply services to rural communities. And I think that that kind of requirement needs to be in place now, especially if they're looking to open it up to foreign competition.
Okay, thank you. Very briefly, Mr. Lockie, please.
Thank you. This is a very brief point, which is Bell, Rogers, and TELUS are enormously profitable companies, and they act in their shareholders' best interest, and they do a good job of it. Foreign shareholders have exactly the same objective as domestic shareholders.
Thank you. We'll go to Ms. Glover, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to the witnesses. I'm going to try to correct the record as we go along here, and I know I only have 5 minutes, but let me start by saying Mr. Bibic and I believe we met the first time 2008, 2009 when we were discussing this very same thing. I met TELUS and Rogers as well. That's where I first met Mr. Sims. On the Heritage Committee, we were talking about the potential of this happening. And so I say that to just reiterate what Mr. Van Kesteren is pointing out. This is not a new discussion. This has been studied and studied and studied. I've only been here since 2008. I appreciate Madame Leblanc taking part in the Finance Committee. She wasn't here in 2008, nor was she here in 2003. This is not a new issue. So let's get that right off the bat. Mr. Coles, you absolutely don't have, it doesn't wash when you say we ought to remove this. This has been studied forever. In fact, the budget was released in March. We're now 2 months into studying the BIA. It's unheard of to have a private business study something for years and then to have the decision and then study the decision 4 months before actually proceeding. So I'm sorry, but that just doesn't wash with us nor with Canadians. So let's move on from there and talk about how we've actually affected some benefits for Canadians. Again, Mr. Coles, you said there's no evidence to suggest that Canadians pay less as a result of the decisions made by the government, and that's who we represent, Canadians. We represent Canadians, and I love to see this competition because I think it's great for Canadians. The proof is in the pudding. The proof is that there's 10% less being spent by Canadian consumers, thanks to what was done by this government in 2008. And that is studied. That is proof. We have the documents. So competition has proven to be very, very good for Canadians. And so I did want to correct some of those things that were said in my 5 minutes. I also have to correct Monsieur Caron because, in fact, the rural and remote access was not the only thing that Minister Paradis mentioned. There were 3 objectives that the government had in moving forward with this. He's mentioned only one, and that was the availability of advanced services for all Canadians, including those in rural areas, in a timely manner. That was one of the objectives. And let me tell you that 98% of Canadians now have access to high-speed wireless services since we made these decisions to open up competition. So 98% is a great number. Again, all documented, all proof is available. But the other 2 objectives that have to be put on the record are that we also expect to have sustained competition in wireless telecommunication services and a robust investment and innovation in this sector. So, again, I have to correct these things because I don't want Canadians watching to be misled by half-explained measures, etc. I want them to get a real good picture. Now, there is one issue that has not been discussed, and I know there's some more questions to come from you later, but I am very interested in your positions on something else that's in this measure, and that is the spectrum for public safety. I'd like each of you to tell me very quickly, do you think that's the right measure? Do you think we're doing the right thing for Canadians by providing more spectrum to public safety?
Go down the row.
I think The private sector should be tasked with delivering to public safety the networks they need, rather than set aside specifically spectrum for public safety only, or at least that should be considered.
Yeah, we support putting aside spectrum for public safety. I think there's still issues around how it's going to actually get deployed in an efficient and effective way. But certainly the notion of having the spectrum there to enable that support is something we support.
It appears to be a good objective. Next question is how is public safety going to be using the spectrum, and that's really the bigger question.
Well, I think to your point, though, Madam, is that it is in the rules, and I don't see the rules in the budget. So you say that there has been 4 months of discussions, but we would...
Mr. Polis, can you answer the question I've put to you?
Yeah.
Because all that you see is only the little bit. We've been here for a long time, seen a lot more documentation than you, and I give you that. But what about the spectrum for public safety?
We're out of time, so just briefly, Mr. Coles.
Yes, if the rules are, as the friend beside me, if they're in the public's best interest.
Very good, thanks.
Mr. Lockie?
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Bibic and also Mr. Kirby and Mr. Wong. I'm not sure whether I agree with Mr. Coles or not, but look, as a practical reality, that spectrum doesn't have commercial value. The U.S. decision made that clear, but just as a practical policy observation, I think that it's the wrong policy for the U.S. to have adopted. I don't think it's sufficient.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Mr. Jean. Final round, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you can let me know when I have 2.5 minutes left, I'd appreciate it. I would have to say that I've really enjoyed Mr. Kirby and Mr. Lockie's presentation and response. And I would say to you, Mr. Bibic, that are you an attorney, a lawyer?
Yes.
Well, if I ever have a friend with a smoking gun in their hand, I would recommend you as a defense attorney. You are very good. I enjoyed your testimony very, very much. I
don't know where that was going.
I think I was also an attorney. That's why I respected what you said, notwithstanding the disagreement with it. Now, data has tripled since 2008. Data usage has tripled since 2008. And we've got some new technology coming out, iPads with 4G, LTE. Canadians are using a lot more information. They're accessing a lot more. So we've got a lot of changes coming forward. And Mr. Lockie, I'd like you to comment on that in particular, because it's all about, for us as a government and responding to consumers, more choices, lower prices. How do you see the future unfolding if we don't get this more competition in from around the world to create a more competitive environment for this high usage of data?
Well, I think there are a couple of different elements to it. I think that competition forces innovation, and I think innovation is a big part of the answer to increasing data usage. I think that when you have competition, you have limited resources, then you get better at using them. And I would observe that Bell, Rogers, and TELUS, who point to the behemoths, AT&T and Verizon down in the States, those entities are themselves accused of having too much spectrum and hoarding it, and yet they service 20 times the number of subscribers using their spectrum per megahertz that Bell, Rogers, and TELUS do. Why? Because that's all they've got, and they've got that many subscribers. That's a lot of traffic. That's a lot of capacity getting eaten up. So I think what you need is competition to force innovation, to force efficiency.
Especially with the future use and the demand that's going to happen with
categorically, it's going to continue in that direction.
And especially something that I think has been missed a little bit is the e-health apps, the advanced apps that are going to be able to be used by this technology as well. And I think consumers are going to be much better off.
Absolutely, and look, the simple practical reality is that the world is going wireless, and wireless requires spectrum.
The final question I have is, you mentioned you're not very satisfied or 100% satisfied with the move forward to access more capital. What would you recommend as far as that goes?
Well, it gives me an opportunity to observe one thing. One is that the Investment Canada Act is still in force, and it has application in these kinds of moves. So I think that there's been a lot made out of the specter of these foreign companies coming in. The second is the 10% thing. I actually think it's a cautious, wise, incremental approach. But I actually don't object to lifting the barriers, because I think it would be irrelevant. They have no trouble getting capital. They're giving capital away in dividends. So I don't think that it's that meaningful kind of a move. When I talk about more needing to be done, I'm talking about the fact that there's a massive spectrum imbalance, and that is at the heart of what is going to be a competition issue in this country for a long time unless the government steps up and does something meaningful. And candidly, and I've been very on the record with this, I don't think that the measures taken in the recent policy, which Mr. Bibic is complaining about, go nearly far enough. I think that the government set aside, effectively, 75% of it for the companies that have all the spectrum that we've been talking about today, and 25% for everyone else. It actually boggles my mind.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jean. I'm just going to use the rest of Mr. Jean's time. I did want to follow up on the cost of capital issue because, as Mr. Van Kesteren said, this issue has been discussed for a long time. I mean, our report of the industry committee back in 2003 recommended lowering it for all. But we've had two reports since then, as has been pointed out by witnesses, in terms of the TPR and the Red Wilson report, which said we should do exactly what the government's doing in this budget bill. And the argument for that is because, and Mr. Bibic, you referenced the don't set up two tiers of capital. But the argument of the new entrants, plus the argument of the Red Wilson report and others, is there is a two-tier capital structure now. So Bell, because of its size, and Rogers and Telus have a cost of capital structure, and new entrants have a cost of capital structure which is higher. So that's the argument. I mean, that's the essential argument that they're making. That's what the government's acting upon. So if I could perhaps, just in a brief time, Mr. Bibic, perhaps getting you on the record in terms of responding to that, and then maybe Mr. Ulaki responding to Mr. Bibic.
So everyone would like lower cost of capital. Ours may be lower than theirs, but you always want a lower cost of capital. That's the point, first point. I think what I'm saying is actually, I think, being misconstrued in many respects, because what we're saying is the rules are lifted for these folks. Good. Let them do what they need to do once the bill is passed. And they will have an opportunity to bid for 2 blocks of spectrum. We will have an opportunity to bid for 1. We don't quarrel with our friends here, nor with the government's policy on that. We are bigger than they are, and the government had to balance a number of competing interests, and we respect that. Our fundamental point, though, is the AT&Ts and Verizons of the world are also 10 times bigger than us, so we don't want any advantage over them. We just want a level playing field if they come in to bid. If they don't, then leave the rules the way they are. That's the only fundamental point we're making.
Okay, I appreciate that. Mr. Lockie, brief response to that?
Brief response. I already said that I think it's a wise incremental approach to do the 10%. I think it's an important thing to observe. The Investment Canada Act continues to apply. I also think it's very important to observe that at today's revenue levels, that's a $4.2 billion company that you have to get to before these rules don't apply to you or start to apply to you again. And that is a long time away. Candidly, I wish it wasn't, but it is a long time away. And given that, there will be ample opportunity for the government and I can't even put a time frame on it, to consider whether or not it makes sense to expand it beyond that 10%. And if they get close, deal with it then. This is an incremental approach, and it was the right one.
I appreciate very much the discussion tonight. It's been a very good one. On behalf of all the colleagues, I want to thank you for being here and for extending time because of the votes. And we will suspend for a couple of minutes, colleagues, and we'll bring the next panel forward. Thank you. Merci. to thank our witnesses for patiently awaiting the slight delay caused by the vote earlier. We do have 8 witnesses here, 2 by video conference, and I'll list them in the order that they will present. We have, first of all, we have Professor Len Zettel from Memorial University of Newfoundland. We have from the Agriculture Union, we have the National President, Bob Kingston. We have from the C.D. Howe Institute, someone familiar with us at the Finance Committee here, Philippe Bergevin, used to work for our committee. We have from the Consumer Health Products Canada, Mr. President David Skinner. The Canada Organic Trade Association, Executive Director Matthew Holmes. From Nalcor Energy, we have Richard Wright. And by video conference from Anchorage, Alaska, we have Professor Richard Steiner. Professor Steiner, can you hear me okay?
I can. Can you hear me okay, sir?
I can, yes. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And by video conference
My pleasure.
from Toronto, we have from the United Steelworkers, economist Aaron Weir. Can you hear me, Mr. Weir?
Yes, I can.
You can. Thank you. So we'll have you present up to 5 minutes in the order that I read them, and we'll start then with Professor Zettel, please. And you have an audio clip for us, I believe.
Yes. In a second, we'll get to that. So, Mr. Chairman, Committee, thank you for the invitation to present here. Just by introduction, I'm a physics professor at Memorial University, and my research areas are physical oceanography and sonar systems. And my goal here is to provide a bit of background to inform the deliberations of this committee. And so the background, just to describe seismic systems a little bit, they use sound to probe beneath the ocean floor. The sound sources are impulsive and loud. They're louder than normal physical sources of sound in the ocean, save perhaps lightning strikes and earthquakes. And they're certainly louder than any biological sources, louder than shipping noise. And it's hard to describe what these sounds are like, and you have discussions of so many dB and things like that. So I thought it would be useful to play a recording. So this is my little sound bite. And so this is from the south coast of Newfoundland. Okay, so that's a seismic shot. It's from a ship about 15 kilometers away from the recording. Seismic surveys like that would go on for weeks at a time, and those shots are fired nominally every 10 seconds. It depends on the exact details. And I should recognize Dr. Jack Lawson at DFO for providing me with that recording. So the impacts, there are acute impacts to animals from these sound sources. Animals within 100 meters can suffer, physical damage, hearing loss. But that effect is restricted to within about 100 meters or so. And so that restricts the overall impact of that kind of effect. Much more of a concern is the chronic exposure, because that sound will propagate for 100 kilometers easily in the ocean, both because it's so loud and because sound propagates so well. Whales certainly react to seismic survey vessels. It's recently been demonstrated that they have stress response to chronic noise. But there's also an economic twist to this, because fish catch rates have been noted to decrease in response to seismic surveys. There's anecdotal evidence that crab and shrimp catch rates off of Newfoundland have been decreased due to seismic surveys. So that implies an economic consideration here. In Newfoundland, the crab and shrimp market was worth somewhat less than $500 million last year. And so that's an industry that carries on year after year. There are mitigations that the industry applies to these systems. Most of them target the acute exposure. They rely on visual observers to spot endangered species within about 500 meters of the survey vessel. And because they rely on that visual observation, they don't work at night. They don't work well in fog or rainy conditions, which are known to occur on the Grand Banks. Surveys can also be timed to avoid critical times for biological processes, critical migrations, things of that sort. But that happens to occur in the summer in Newfoundland, and that also happens to be the time that's most suitable for seismic surveys. Lovely. So the intention of the present legislation is really to provide easier access for the oil companies to seismic survey vessels. But if it has the desired effect, the concern is that you'll have more seismic survey operations and consequently significantly more environmental impact and a cumulative impact to be concerned about. And there's also the associated impacts on the fishing industry. So this would argue, in fact, for greater control of the industry rather than less to constrain and manage that impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Hear from Mr. Kingston now, please.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Bob Kingston. I am the National President of the Agriculture Union. Before going on leave of absence to serve as an elected union officer, I spent 25 years as a CFIA and Agriculture Canada inspector, including 15 years as a multi-commodity supervisor. For the Agriculture Union, two themes emerge from the amendments to the Seed Act and the Health of Animals Act that are proposed in Bill C-38. The first can best be summed up by quoting the British statesman and philosopher Edmund Burke, who once said, "Those who don't know history are destined to repeat it." Let me explain. Bill C-38 would amend the Seeds Act to privatize the seeds program, including inspection. The CFI president will issue and revoke licenses for private companies to whom this responsibility is handed off. This presumes that the CFI will be in a position to set standards for these companies and enforce those standards through oversight. Except, as in this case, CFI often designs systems without considering the resources required to properly monitor the systems they put in place. For example, we can look at the maple leaf food listeriosis outbreak in the late summer of 2008. The Prime Minister appointed Sheila Wetherill to find out why the outbreak occurred and to recommend ways to prevent another. Just before the outbreak, the CFI had implemented a new inspection system called the Compliance Verification System, or CVS, a fact that was central in Sheila Wetherill's report. Let me quote to you what she had to say about CVS. The CVS was, quote, implemented without a detailed assessment of the resources available to take on these new tasks, end quote. She also found that CVS was flawed and in need of, quote, critical improvements related to its design, planning, and implementation, end quote. Ms. Wetherill recommended that the CFIA make sure that its resources and inspection processes are in alignment. In other words, make sure you know how many inspectors and other resources you need to make your systems work properly. With all of the positions being cut at CFIA, they simply do not have the resources to take on the oversight required by proposals in Bill C-38, especially when you consider the other new systems the agency is currently developing, also without regard for available resources. For example, the agency is putting in place a new regulation to license all food importers. This may or may not result in a safer imported food, but without additional resources to monitor compliance and enforce standards, we'll never know. Regulations without enforcement capacity are actually worse than no regulations, and the new license systems may become little more than an unattended paper exercise. As Mr. Burke would advise, remember the lessons of the maple leaf outbreak when you're considering new systems at CFIA. There are many examples like this, in fact, much more not more serious than what happened at Maple Leaf, but pretty serious. But time is short, so I'll move to the second theme, which is the secrecy around the decisions related to the budget. Changes at the CFIA arising from the budget were decided in secret. This was unfortunate because currently many senior managers at the agency have little expertise or experience in the industry they regulate, meaning that the wisdom, knowledge, and experience of their frontline experts would have been invaluable in making those decisions. Without that expertise, decisions were made which could have serious consequences. Let me give you an example. Because of budget cuts, the agency has decided to close its plant quarantine facility at Sanishton on Vancouver Island and move the operation to Summerland in the heart of the wine and fruit industry in the BC interior. If made in the open, this decision would have raised red flags among anybody involved in plant health or fruit production in BC. Even the expert industry government advisory group, the BC Plant Protection Advisory Council, was not consulted and still hasn't been. This is a post-entry quarantine station where plants are grown for years while being checked for diseases before being released into the regular production environment. South Vancouver Island is a good place for it because of its natural isolation characteristics. This decision will put potentially diseased plants in the middle of one of Canada's richest agricultural regions. In addition, the Summerland facility will have to be expanded and land purchased, costs that will offset. The current site can't be sold by the government as it's locked up in Aboriginal title. And we have other concerns about proposed amendments to the Health of Animals Act and several other things going on right now in the agency, but time's short, so I guess I'll have to hope there's a question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kingston. Monsieur Bergevin, s'il vous plaît. For 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to thank you for this opportunity to appear here today. I am Philippe Bergevin, and I am the Senior Policy Analyst of the C.D. Howe Institute. I have prepared some comments on the bill Investment Canada, and I will be continuing in English, but I will be glad to answer questions in either French or English.
It's on the amendments contained in Division 28 of Bill C-38 that relate to Investment Canada Act. Overall, I believe the measures are positive, although perhaps they do not go far enough. The measures that are aimed at facilitating the disclosure of information related to the Act are definitely welcome steps. Increased transparency enhances predictability in the application of the Act, which obviously is positive for both investors and the public at large. I do, however, see some potential unintended consequences with respect to the proposed powers for the government to accept securities against potential fines imposed on foreign investors. So while this amendment will enhance the credibility of the commitments made by foreign investors to the government, I believe they will have, to some extent, a chilling effect on some foreign investors. If it were to become common practice, it would, frankly, perhaps raise some red flags in the case of some investors. And I think there's some room to increase the level of transparency further in terms of the Act itself. There are still no formal requirements for the Minister to disclose publicly the reasoning for rejecting an investment, in particular if and when a foreign investor eventually withdraws its application. It's important for the Minister to articulate his or her reasoning when turning down an investment, and even when accepting an investment, because it builds kind of an inventory of decisions that can help clarify the legislation and therefore the understanding of potential investors. And disclosure also helps the notion that the review process is not unduly politicized, and but rather based on sound principles. There are also, in my opinion, further opportunities to clarify aspects of the Act through the use of guidelines. The criteria used under the Act are inherently subjective and unpredictable in their application, so increased use of guidelines sort of help provide more guidance on the government's interpretation of the Act. More fundamentally, however, I would respectfully submit that parliamentarians consider whether the net benefit test is the right question for Canada. Sort of in the same spirit as the Red Wilson's report or the Competition Policy Review Panel report, I think Canada should adopt a national interest test and scrap the current net benefit test. So what does that mean in practice? It simply means that you move the burden of proof from the business to the government. So it requires the federal government to invoke important public policy reasons such as national security or cultural policy, for instance, to block a proposed investment. So there are already some similar concepts in the Act, but such public policy reasons would become the main building block of the Act under a national interest test. So such an approach would be more consistent with the view that there are positive benefits on average associated with foreign investment, while recognizing that in some limited circumstances there are valid public policy reasons that could be invoked to deny a foreign investment proposal. So just to conclude, while the amendments before you in regards to enhanced transparency in regards to the Investment Canada Act are, in my opinion, positive steps, there's an opportunity to adopt a test that would recognize that, in most instances, foreign investment is beneficial for the Canadian economy, while making sure that the federal government still has all the latitude to uphold important public policy objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll hear from Mr. Skinner now, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee for allowing me the opportunity to speak today on behalf of the consumer health products industry on Bill C-38, the Jobs, Growth, and Long-Term Prosperity Act. Consumer Health Products Canada is the national industry association representing manufacturers, marketers, and distributors of consumer health products. The association members, who range from small businesses to large corporations, account for the vast majority of sales of this $4.7 billion market for these products. Our member sales are equally proportioned between natural health products and other consumer products, including sunscreens, allergy medicines, upset stomach remedies, and so forth. Our association has been the leading advocate for the consumer health products industry and for self-care for more than 115 years. Division 19 of Part 4 of Bill C-38 contains proposed amendments to the Food and Drugs Act, which will lead to growth and innovation in our industry. Clauses 413, 414, and 415 would permit the Ministry to establish a list of prescription drugs and prescription drug classes. This list of drugs would be referenced in the regulations and amended from time to time. Products on this list would be available to Canadians products not on this list would be available to Canadians for self-care. Products for self-care are those that would contain an ingredient switched from prescription to consumer health product status. Products that have been switched result in lower costs for publicly funded drug benefit plans, a reduction in physician visits for the purposes of obtaining a prescription, and the corresponding reduction in the costs of the healthcare system. Today, when an ingredient is switched from prescription to consumer health product status, an application containing all the information that's necessary to demonstrate the safety, quality, and efficacy of the ingredients undergoes full pre-market scientific review by Health Canada. Bill C-38 would not change this process one bit. Once Health Canada has completed its scientific review and approved the ingredient for consumer health product status, the active ingredient must then be removed from Schedule F of the Food and Drug Regulations before a product can be marketed under the current system. This has resulted in at least a 14 to 24-month delay between the time when a decision is being made by Health Canada scientists and when the product is actually available for Canadians to use. What is being proposed by Bill C-38 would permit products that are suitable for self-care to be made available much more quickly to the public and provide the incentives for the industry to conduct research to introduce new and innovative products for self-care to the marketplace, thus benefiting Canadians. Consumer Health Products Canada fully supports the proposed amendments to the Food and Drug Act contained in Division 19 of Part 4 of Bill C-38 and urges the Standing Committee on Finance to support the legislative amendments that will lead to the growth of consumer products and provide health products of benefit to Canadians. Thank you for your time and consideration of our perspectives. Look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Skinner. We'll hear from Mr. Holmes now, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, honorable members. I'm very pleased to appear before you this evening as a representative of the organic sector in Canada. The Canada Organic Trade Association, or COTA, is the member-based organization representing the organic value chain, from producers and manufacturers through to retailers and exporters. The organic sector is relatively new, but it is growing at a tremendous speed. The recently released Statistics Canada Census of Agriculture data showed that while total farms in Canada have declined by 17% since 2001, the organic farms have increased by 66.5%. So we now have approximately 5,000 certified operators in Canada, including handlers and manufacturers. And our domestic market is worth over $2.6 billion per year, making Canada the 5th largest world market for organic. and globally, organic sales are now valued at $59 billion per year. In 2009, COTA welcomed the government's new regulations for the organic sector, controlling and defining organic claims in the marketplace and making the national standards mandatory. Subsequently, the government established progressive trade agreements through the world's first equivalency arrangements with the United States and European Union, giving Canadian domestic certification and Canadian producers unparalleled access to 96% of the world market. Although a quickly growing market, the organic sector in Canada still faces many challenges, including supply shortages, especially in seed, an impasse in which we are obliged to meet our regulated standards but have no government formalized mechanism or funding to innovate or respond to opportunity in those standards, which is similar to the issue that Mr. Kingston raised, and as well as a particular risk to our business model posed by the unmitigated introduction of prohibited genetically engineered products, which can cause our members to lose the organic designation of their product and loss of market access. So with regards to the current changes proposed in C38 pertaining to the Seeds Act, this is Division 26, COTA notes that the role and authority of the President of CFIA are increased significantly. The proposed changes would give the President of CFIA the ability to grant licenses to any person to perform any activity relating to controlling or assuring quality of seeds, including sampling, grading, or labeling. Under the current legislation, the only other role described by the Seeds Act for the President of CFIA is the designation and oversight of inspectors. It's important to note that the proposed changes, in our opinion, do not remove the powers of the CFIA inspectors, but may provide CFIA with the avenue to outsource review services for specific functions or aspects, and that outsourcing could go to industry groups, private enterprise, or individuals, as far as we know. And I should note for you here that the Canada Organic regime is delivered via a system of third-party inspectors, accredited certifiers, and conformity verification oversight bodies enforced by CFIA and its inspectors. And so therefore, I cannot speak against third-party delivery of certain services and functions that have regulatory oversight. However, without more details that we don't see in Bill C-38 yet, on who would qualify for such licenses and how they would be overseen and enforced, it is prudent to caution that there could be an inherent risk for the lack of transparency, accountability, or neutrality. This is, of course, dependent on the limits and parameters established by the Governor and Council. It's also feasible that this new role for the President of CFIA has the potential to enable external criteria or purity standards to come to bear on the introduction of new seed varieties, which could lead, for example, to the introduction of new genetically engineered seed that has been approved by a foreign government, but which has not been reviewed or assessed for environmental release in Canada. Such a shift within CFIA and the Seeds Act certainly echoes sentiments we've seen expressed by the biotechnology sector calling for a low-level presence policy in Canada, which would allow unapproved events from genetic engineering appearing in shipments below a certain threshold to enter Canada without action or mitigation. But as you know, seed has a tendency to grow and to multiply. So for the organic sector, the introduction of new GE seeds into our environment without at least the check and balance of due process and review by government agencies threatens the integrity of our quickly growing and high-value market, a market, I'll remind you, which is directly responsive to consumer preferences and concerns. So thank you for your invitation to speak and for your attention tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Holmes. We'll hear from Mr. Wright now, please.
Mr. Chair, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm representing Nalcor Energy, the Provincial Energy Corporation, Newfoundland and Labrador, on the issue of proposed amendments to the Coasting Trade Act, amendments which we support. We're at a time and place in Atlantic Canada where new exploration is necessary to grow the oil and gas industry and find Canada's future offshore oil fields. The Canadian offshore is underexplored relative to other competitive jurisdictions, leaving us with significant potential for future discoveries. The exploration for new discoveries of oil and gas is a globally competitive business that's conducted in a highly technical, process-driven fashion. Canada competes for exploration investment against other areas of the world, such as Brazil, West Africa, Australia, the U.S. Gulf of Mexico, and the North Sea, to mention a few. Seismic data acquisition is one of the earliest phases of oil and gas exploration, and one that plays a critical role in unlocking presently undiscovered oil and gas resources. To decide in which region to explore, global oil and gas companies use data, and in particular seismic data, to locate highly prospective regions to focus their exploration activity. In a global exploration portfolio, companies have the option to explore where appropriate amounts and quality of seismic data can effectively reduce their exploration risk, making high-quality seismic data essential to follow on exploration activity. In Newfoundland and Labrador, Nova Scotia, Norway, and many other jurisdictions, strong correlations exist between the amount of 2D seismic data and the amount of exploration drilling. Historically, in Newfoundland and Labrador, seismic data acquisition proportionally results in exploration drilling in the years that follow. This makes sense because seismic data provides images of the subsurface, much like a CAT scan of the Earth, and helps identify prospective targets for oil and gas drilling. Any impediment to acquiring seismic data directly impacts the number of wells drilled and consequently the likely number of future discoveries. The existing potential of our offshore industry in Newfoundland and Labrador is substantial. Our offshore sedimentary basin areas are larger than both the offshore United Kingdom and offshore Norway. While our basins are significantly larger, our rate of exploration appraisal well drilling has been much lower, despite similar success rates per well. Across the basins, the UK has a well density of approximately 1 well for every 139 square kilometers. Norway, 1 well per 461 square kilometers. Newfoundland and Labrador is 1 well for over 4,000 square kilometers. For comparison, the world-class Hibernia oil field offshore eastern Newfoundland is approximately 150 square kilometers, meaning that a number of new fields could exist between our existing sparse well coverage. This low historical exploration level is despite Newfoundland and Labrador's average oil discovered per exploration appraisal well being in the range of these other jurisdictions. While it's understood that the intent of the Coasting Trade Act is to protect Canadian interest, its application in foreign flag seismic vessels, this process is inadvertently working against Canadian interests by reducing our global competitiveness in exploration. This impacts 2 key areas of offshore exploration in relation to seismic data. Many offshore discoveries in Newfoundland and Labrador were initially imaged through multi-client data, so that's data where a group of companies get together and share the risk and cost. The number of multi-client surveys conducted offshore East Coast Canada has been reduced significantly because when objections are raised about these surveys by foreign flag vessels are sustained, the surveys have rarely proceeded using the Canadian flag vessel offered as a substitute. The cancelled survey means no data is acquired, no resulting wells are drilled, and no additional discoveries are made. Since 2001, 34% of all seismic surveys by non-Canadian flag companies have been objected to under the Coasting Trade Act. Thank you. The objections create uncertainty in our jurisdiction for global seismic companies looking to acquire multi-client data, who then in turn direct their exploration investment activity to more healthy environments in other countries outside Canada. In cabotage laws in the United Kingdom, Norway, the United States, and Brazil, to mention a few examples, do not impede the importation of foreign flag seismic vessels into their country. The USA Jones Act, which requires not only USA flag vessels, but USA built vessels in many marine categories, also recognizes this technologically specific industry and allows for foreign flag seismic vessels to conduct surveys. The value of the offshore development that results from offshore exploration, starting with seismic exploration, is important in Newfoundland and Labrador and Canada. The nominal value of an average oil field discovered offshore Newfoundland and Labrador would see about $12 billion return in taxes on oil sales to Canada's federal government. These figures are based only on corporate tax on oil sales. In conclusion, to fully realize Canada's exploration potential, exemption of seismic activity from the Coasting Trade Act, as proposed in the budget, will help make Canada competitive with other resource jurisdictions around the world in attracting front-end global exploration investment. Based on our past success in drilling and our vast area of underexplored basins, we feel that increased exploration activity will ultimately lead to new discoveries for Canadians. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll now hear from Professor Steiner, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is the audio still good?
Very good, yes. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to provide my comments on that specific provision of C-38 as well, the exemption for foreign flag vessels. On its surface, it's not a bad idea per se, but I would caution with one caveat, and that is you have to have very good government regulatory environment plus good enforcement of that regulatory environment to make sure it's as safe as possible. We have good experience here in the United States just 2 years ago with a foreign flagged, foreign-owned vessel that we thought was under good U.S. control. It's named the Deepwater Horizon. I think we all remember the catastrophic results of that. That vessel was flagged in the Marshall Islands and owned by Transocean. We thought the U.S. government was doing the proper job in regulating it. It wasn't. So we have to have we have to have very high controls and regulatory environment here. A couple of very quick respectful recommendations for the bill. For this provision of the bill, number one, make it explicit in bill language that the exemption does not exempt the vessel from any Canadian existing or future regulations or laws. And I think it's important that environmental regulations not be rolled back in any way in this bill. And I think this bill is actually an opportunity, a good opportunity to strengthen Canadian environmental regulation. And I think that's in industry's best interest as well, as we found out here in the United States. Secondly, I think this is an opportunity to improve Canadian standards. And by the way, I would offer that neither, in my opinion as a biologist, neither the Canadian standards for seismic mitigation nor the United States standards are as good as we can do. We need to do better, and we must do better. Thirdly, I would respectfully recommend that the bill ask the Canadian and U.S. governments to develop a bilateral agreement to make seismic mitigation and monitoring consistent across our borders, both in the Atlantic, the Arctic Ocean, and in the Pacific. It makes no sense to have conflicting regulations and monitoring environments. And then finally, I would recommend that the bill suggests that the Canadian administration negotiate a seismic mitigation protocol at the Arctic Council to be trans-Arctic. I think Professor Zedel did very well in going over some of the very brief risks of seismic arrays offshore. They are very real. As I mentioned earlier, so I will not touch on those here. I did provide the committee staff with a copy of notes, and you're all welcome to have those if you would like. My principal issue is that neither the U.S. system nor the Canadian system are as good as they need to be in managing seismic shoots offshore. I've scanned the statement of Canadian practice on this, and frankly, a 500-meter safety zone for seismic shoots is in and of itself insufficient. It needs to be a received level, sound level for cetaceans, pinnipeds, seabirds, and fish. We know that impacts can go out to 50 or 60 kilometers on certain species away from seismic arrays, and the effects can be quite profound, particularly with continuous sound pulses over a long period of time. There's a number of other things. The transboundary radiation of sound, even though these guns are pointed down into the seabed, which is where they're targeted, there's a lot of horizontal radiation and propagation of the sound out to several hundred kilometers. So if we are, for instance, shooting off the Alaska Arctic coast, the Beaufort Sea off the Canadian Mackenzie Delta is going to be radiated with sound as well. So we have to have some consistency and I feel a bilateral agreement to make it as safe as possible. I think I'll stop at that. There's a number of other issues I touched on in my notes, and I would encourage all of you to take a look at those, and I'd be delighted to answer any questions. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Steiner. We'll now hear from Mr. Weir in our final presentation tonight.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thanks very much for accommodating me by video conference. I've been asked to speak about changes to the Investment Canada Act in the Omnibus Budget Bill. My union's perspective on foreign investment has very much been shaped by our recent experiences with multinational corporations. Specifically, we represent the employees of the former Inco, Stelco, and Alcan. all of these Canadian companies were taken over by foreign companies that made Investment Canada Act commitments. Shortly after these takeovers occurred, the new owners, Vale, U.S. Steel, and Rio Tinto, demanded huge concessions and pushed very aggressively for those concessions from their Canadian workers. I would draw the committee's particular attention to the situation with Rio Tinto because the former Alcan employees continue to be locked out in Alma, Quebec as we speak, with Rio Tinto trying to replace them with contractors who would be paid half as much. So the United Steelworkers Union is of the view that the current Investment Canada Act is not very effective in ensuring a net benefit for Canadians. And we also believe that the Harper government has not been very effective in holding companies to their Investment Canada Act commitments. Now, moving on to the Omnibus Bill itself, the main change that it makes to the Investment Canada Act is to allow the minister to disclose reasons for accepting or rejecting proposed foreign takeovers. And we believe that this increase in transparency is a step in the right direction, but that it does not go nearly far enough. First of all, the Act would allow disclosure, but it would not require disclosure. So the minister would still have a great deal of discretion to withhold information from the Canadian public. We believe that it's actually quite important to disclose not just the reasons for decisions, but also the commitments that foreign companies have made to gain approval under the Investment Canada Act, because that disclosure would allow Canadians to hold investors to those commitments and to know whether or not the commitments have been violated. More fundamentally, we believe that the Investment Canada Act review process needs to be opened up before a decision has been made. So it's not just a matter of transparency about a decision after the fact. We need to really open up the process to allow workers and workers' organizations that are likely to be affected by these foreign takeovers to actually provide some input and some response to proposed takeovers. Now, moving a little bit beyond the omnibus budget bill itself, the government has indicated that it plans to make another change by regulation. And that change is to raise the threshold for proposed takeovers to be reviewed under the Investment Canada Act to $1 billion. And our concern about this is that we believe recent evidence and recent experience argues for greater scrutiny of proposed foreign takeovers, not less scrutiny. And raising the threshold would basically have the effect of exempting a whole new tranche of foreign takeovers from any scrutiny at all under the Investment Canada Act. So we would see this increase in the threshold as a move in the wrong direction. So to kind of summarize, we're very much concerned about foreign takeovers. We believe that the Omnibus Bill takes sort of a baby step in the right direction in the area of transparency, but doesn't go nearly far enough in improving the Investment Canada Act. And we would also note that outside of the Omnibus Budget Bill, the government has stated that by regulation, it intends to make a change that we see as a step in the wrong direction. Now, I would also like to briefly respond to a point that my colleague from the C.D. Howe Institute made about the need to...
Just a brief summary then, please. Because you have about 30 seconds left. So you can summarize, then we'll go on to questions.
Yeah, no problem. My colleague from the C.D. Howe Institute was just suggesting that we needed to sort of put the onus on government to prove why takeover should be stopped. I would note that since the Investment Canada Act was passed in 1985, we've had thousands of foreign takeovers. Only 2 of them have actually been blocked. So I don't think we need to put any more onus on the government to justify blocking takeovers, because that's something that has almost never happened in practice anyway. Thanks very much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Weir. We'll begin members' questions with Ms. Nash, please.
Thank you very much to all of the witnesses. And I just want to start off by saying, for each of you, you're all experts in your field, and you're given 5 minutes to present here tonight, and we get each 5 minutes of questions, including answers, to you. So it's a bit jammed, and one of my colleagues on the committee was saying that many of these issues have been studied many times over the years, but in this particular Parliament, with the 308 elected members who are now representing Canadians, for many it is the first time that they are dealing with these issues, and so to truly represent their constituents, we're feeling that there's so much jammed in this bill. Tonight, of course, we're dealing with the Coasting Trade Act and offshore seismic surveys, food inspection, Investment Canada, the Food and Drug Act, the Seeds Act, and of course we've been dealing with many other topics over the last few days. But I just want to say I regret that we're not able to fully examine each of the areas in which you have expertise, but we do appreciate you being here this evening. I'd like to begin with Mr. Steiner and your comments, and we heard from Dr. Zettel as well about the offshore seismic surveys. And Mr. Steiner, you talked about the Deepwater Horizon and the inadequate regulation that ultimately led to a climate disaster, and a disaster for the U.S. economy and for certainly the people and for the environment that was affected. Can you give us a sense of the economic impact of that disaster, and what kind of regulatory action did the U.S. government take to try to prevent a similar disaster from happening again?
That could take many hours, ma'am, and I appreciate the question. We learned our lesson the hard way with Deepwater Horizon, as we did 23 years ago with the Exxon Valdez right here in Alaska. So we got tanker shipping fixed after that, by and large, but we did not fix offshore drilling and the risks imposed by that. We learned the hard way. We are hoping Canada does not have to likewise learn the hard way. Seismic exploration can cause a lot of long-term, both acute and chronic long-term injury. You asked about the economic implications of Deepwater Horizon. They were obviously enormous. It was the largest accidental oil spill in human history. BP, I believe, has already paid out something like 30 to 40 billion U.S. dollars. And they are faced with another 20 billion or so in natural resource damage claims. So it's going to be, before it's all said and done to BP, a $50 or $60 billion bill. So I would certainly encourage Canada to review your financial liability statutes with regard to exploratory drilling. It's important to note that the Deepwater Horizon was engaged in exploratory drilling. It was not a production facility. So there's a great lot of risk in deepwater exploration. I hope that's responsive to your question in the short time we can.
Yes, thank you for that. So I guess if I can take from your answer that you would agree with Professor Zettel that at a minimum we should be maintaining our regulation and perhaps even re-examining it to make sure we're fully protected, and perhaps enhancing the regulation that we have to protect Canadians and our economy and our environment.
It is my position, ma'am, that both the United States and Canada need to enhance, we need to raise the bar on environmental regulation of the offshore oil and gas industry, and particularly the oil spill risk that it imposes, but as well the risk and impacts we know about from seismic exploration, which are pretty well documented. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask a question of Aaron Weir, but I have about
20 seconds.
20 seconds. I just would like you to comment on the Investment Canada Act. For situations like the U.S. Steel takeover, for example, where Canadians were never able to actually find out the terms of that agreement, and I think we eventually learned about it through a court case. Do you think Canadians ought to be able to find out exactly what the commitments are to Canadians?
Yeah, just a brief response, Mr. Weir.
Yeah, I think it's very important to disclose that information as a matter of democracy, but also as a practical matter of being able to hold companies to the commitments. The commitments don't mean anything if they're secret.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Nash. Mr. Hoback, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. And again, I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming out this evening and being part of this very important process. You know, what you say here does have an impact on how we go through, and the implementation of the budget is a very important matter for Canadians and Canadians as a whole. I come from the province of Saskatchewan, and the province of Saskatchewan in the last 5 years has just gone through tremendous change. It's gone through a tremendous amount of growth. It's seen policies that have created growth. It's the only province in Canada that has balanced its budget. It has a premier that has allowed business to flourish and has encouraged growth, and has actually gone around the world trying to get employees. In fact, he was just over in Ireland trying to get employees out of Ireland to come there, because we need specific trades. We need people to come and fill all the jobs that have been created. And it's amazing, when in early 2000s, when I was in Saskatchewan under an NTP government, we've seen families moving out of Saskatchewan. In fact, Mr. Jean probably enjoyed that time of year, because in his riding, everybody that worked there was either from Newfoundland or Saskatchewan. And now I know a lot of the Saskatchewanites are moving back home and joining their families. So I really find it really interesting. And Mr. Weir, I'm going to direct this towards you. Like, you've been quoted as saying that Premier Wall is flanning the fames of Western alienation because he dared to speak out against NDP leader Thomas Mulcair's attack on Saskatchewan resource sector. I'm just baffled at that, because, first of all, Mr. Wall did not start this debate. It was Mr. Mulcair. Mr. Wall was just defending Saskatchewan, the growth that's happening in Saskatchewan. And I'd also like to point out the fact that the growth in Saskatchewan has had tremendous spin-off effects right across Canada. So you can't honestly say that we'd be better off without a strong resource sector. Is that what you're saying?
Well, no, that's not what I'm saying. And in fact, I'm not sure what this question has to do with the Investment Canada Act or the Omnibus Budget Bill.
Actually,
having said that, I guess I'm happy to answer it. Yeah, so give me a chance to...
Mr. Weir, in 2004...
give me a chance to respond then. So it seems to me that Thomas Mulcair...
Please.
Thank you, Ms. Nash.
Mr. Hoback, do you want to just clarify your question?
Well, the reason I'm going there is in 2004, were you not a candidate for the NDP party in Wascana?
Yes, I absolutely was an NDP candidate in the riding of Wascana. Can I go and respond to your initial question?
One at a time.
Yeah, please. And where I'm going with this
Excuse me, we have a point of order.
Really? What does the man's candidacy in 2004 have to do with this? I mean, I implore this committee to consider what is being asked.
I'll get there.
I'm not sure it's relevant, but it's... go ahead and clarify.
The reason I ask this, Chair, is when we bring witnesses forward, we take them very seriously. And their credibility is very important. And I'm looking at this witness and I'm saying, this is not a credible witness, because this witness is not necessarily speaking on behalf of the economy. He's speaking on behalf of the NDP party of Canada or the NDP party in Saskatchewan. So how do I take what he tells me and give it credibility when I see garbage in what he's put in previous articles? So when you start talking about the implications in the Budget Implementation Act, how can I stipulate, when I look at your history, you're criticizing Saskatchewan, you're criticizing the Premier of Saskatchewan, you've gone through and you've criticized and blamed Saskatchewan's growth for creating unemployment in Ontario, which is totally false. So how do I take you as being credible when you talk about other aspects of the budget?
So, Mr. Weir...
Well, okay, first of all, to go back to your original point, I mean, Mr. Mulcair made some very reasonable observations, which is that this boom in the resource sector has driven up the exchange rate to the detriment of manufacturing and other export industries across the country. The province of Saskatchewan itself has lost 5,000 manufacturing jobs since Premier Wall took office. And it's...
Excuse me.
Okay. The thing that has happened in this place is totally unacceptable. The reference to this man's work as being garbage. People who come before this committee deserve due respect. That is absolutely uncalled for, to say that his work is garbage. You don't even know what this man does, and you're characterizing it as garbage. That's blatantly unfair.
Chair, point of order. First of all, what I'm trying to do is this person's claiming to be an expert witness in a certain specific part of the Budget Implementation Act. I'm looking at that and I'm saying, based on his history and what he said on previous economic issues and how wrong he has been in relevance to Saskatchewan, that he cannot be a credible witness. That is what I'm saying.
Okay. On the same point of order, Mr. Mai and then Mr. Adler.
I think we are at our 65th meeting, and I think I've never heard an attack like we have from Mr. Holbach. I think we have a lot of witnesses who are here. I think the Finance Committee has been very reasonable, and always mentioned that I enjoy working here. But to attack someone on a personal level, and where we have witnesses who are here, who came here, who have waited for us to talk about the bill, I think Mr. Holbach is out of order.
Thank you, Mr. Adler.
In order, and it's clear that Mr. Weir has an agenda, and he spoke about transparency and yet wasn't transparent about his past. And the fact of the matter is that Mr. Holbach did not say that his contribution or his work is garbage. What he did say was that those quotes that are attributed to him, which he did not deny, are garbage.
Okay, Mr. Adler, maybe I could just help the discussion along a little bit. I don't believe that this is a genuine point of order. I think it's a point of discussion. I appreciate the comments that have been made. I'd like to caution the members of the committee that we're working long hours and we need to show respect to those people that have given their time to come here, and I think it's fair for us to have a vigorous debate, but I think what you're making is in fact a point of debate. Yes, Mr. Holbach.
I just want to defend myself, Chair. First of all, this is not a personal attack on Mr. Weir. It will never will be. I don't do business that way. What I am questioning, though, is his credibility, and I'm actually questioning whether or not he's actually representing the United Steelworkers or if he's representing the NDP party.
I'm going to interrupt and say these are all points of debate. These witnesses have all come here in good faith, and you can disagree with what somebody is presenting, but and debate with him vigorously. But I would leave it at that. Can we move on? I'm saying that this is a point of debate.
I have a question for the chair, though.
Yep.
Does that?
There's a list there, Madam
Yeah,
Chair.
I'm on the list. Madam Chair.
So am I.
Okay, Mr. Sims.
No, I'll stay out of this one for now. Just for now.
Okay. Yeah.
I think
No, we had Mr. Marston.
The only thing I'm going to say at this point, does that mean that every witness that comes before us now, we're going to have to ask them what political party they're associated with, what background, what activity they've done, what's their history, what comments they may have made? I mean, it's taking it to a level that we shouldn't be doing. Why don't we just talk to the witnesses about C-38 and get on with this?
Who else do we have? Mr. Jean?
Thank you. I would like to say in relation to the point of order, Mr. Holbach has 5 minutes to ask questions. This individual has come forward criticizing the government in relation to our budget. My understanding is he was a candidate in 2004 for the NDP, but also he currently holds a position with the NDP either in Saskatchewan or federally, and I think it's a legitimate question to ask whether or not he still holds a position because he's criticizing the government, and he's supposed to be an independent witness, not a member of the NDP criticizing the government. And I think it's a legitimate question. So does he have a current role with the NDP federally or provincially? That's a good question.
Well, I don't know, but let's just get back to the debate, and I just again encourage all members to be respectful. And, sorry, was there someone else who had a comment? Did you have a comment?
I was on a long time ago.
Well, I'm not keeping the list, so the clerk is keeping the list. So you're up next.
I actually wanted to agree with Madam Chair regarding the fact that this is actually a point of debate that's frankly probably gone on far too long. I would like to get back to the study at hand, but I agree wholeheartedly with what Mr. Jean just said. This was a question posed to this witness, interrupted by the NDP, and it was not a point of order, and I believe Mr. Holbach ought to be allowed to continue. This is relevant, completely relevant, because independence of witnesses is essential to making sure that we represent Canadians' interests properly. And so I would suggest, Madam Chair, that Mr. Holbach be given back his time and that we proceed, but that you rule that in fact, was not a point of order and that Mr. Holbach can continue the line of questioning he began.
Let me just clarify. The clock stops when the point of order is raised. And I'm going to say again that I have said it's a point of debate and not a point of order. And I would just encourage all committee members to be respectful, and it's fine to make a point on something, but we have to be respectful to the witnesses that have come here, and it's fine to ask them questions and then to let them answer.
Can you inform me how much time is left?
You have a minute and a half.
Minute and a half. Okay, Mr. Weir, have you ever been a member of the NDP party, or are you presently a member of the NDP party?
Yes, I've been a member of the New Democratic Party for 15 years.
United Steelworkers, or are you speaking on behalf of the NDP party?
Well, I mean, as you may be aware, the United Steelworkers Union is itself affiliated to the New Democratic Party. So I mean, it's no secret that I'm a member of the NDP or that I was an NDP candidate in the past. It's not as though you've unearthed some deep, dark secret here.
So when you do policy for United Steelworkers, are you doing policy based on what the NDP want that policy to be, or based on what the United Steelworkers need that policy to be?
Well, I've given you a presentation based on the experience that members of the United Steelworkers have had with foreign takeovers in the Canadian economy.
Okay. I think I'm going to move on, and I think I've proven my point, Madam Chair, that the credibility of this witness is definitely questionable because of his political ties and because of his motives politically in criticizing the budget bill, which the NDP would never vote for anyway. So I think it's very clear in this case, the situation.
Crystal clear.
Actually, I think I'll leave it at there, Madam Chair. I think I've got about 4 or 5 seconds left.
Mr. Sims.
Wasn't that a hoot? For the sake of disclosure, I too was a candidate in 2004 for the Liberal Party. I'm a Leo, and I enjoy long walks on the beach. And I hope that helps my credibility. I'm not quite sure if it does or not. I'd like to get back to the seismic activity issue because we saw I saw some compelling words about the effects of seismic and cross-border relationships and upping the ante, as it were. But we didn't hear from Mr. Wright on this one, who has an opinion about seismic activity from a commercial side of it. But is there any way, Mr. Wright, that what you've heard here about, because there are countries, a lot of countries that don't have this, right? I'm assuming. Is that correct?
Don't have what?
Don't have rules about seismic activity such as we do.
So I think that there's a couple of separate issues here. One is the Coasting Trade Act as it pertains to importing foreign seismic vessels.
Right.
So in that particular issue, Canada is a little anomalous with Nigeria in its process for importing foreign flag ships. The second issue is environmental protection. And Canada, the Canada Newfoundland Labrador Offshore Petroleum Board has some of the most stringent regulations globally in terms of how seismic is monitored. Marine mammals, there's numerous studies ongoing in terms of its effect on fish species, etc., shrimp.
Does the CNLOPB, the Offshore Petroleum Board, be affected in this?
Not directly. I think that there is a potential if the budget amendment is passed and that the foreign flag, it's easier to import a foreign flag ship into Canada, it's likely that there could be increased activity. So the board would be affected in terms of having more activity to regulate.
Oh, I see. Back to our guests who are in favor more. Mr. Zedel, would you like to? Sorry, I probably pronounced that incorrectly. Zedel?
No, my parents chose Zedel, so
Zedel it
you
is.
get it right.
I won't argue with your parents, sir. I won't argue with your parents.
No, don't do that.
When you say that this has egregious effect on species such as crab and shrimp, you're saying that the increased activity certainly will have an effect for the spawning grounds, for the biological migration?
There will be impacts, and the degree is, hard to judge.
Is that the case in Norway, where Mr. Wright points out that seismic activity is increased over there?
It was in Norway where it was demonstrated that fishing catch rates were decreased in association with seismic surveys.
Does this bill not go far enough, in your opinion?
I find the problem here, and this is political, but you guys are into that.
Well, we certainly were just in. Have you been a candidate, sir? I'm just kidding.
I don't have to answer that, right?
No, you don't. No. Please don't.
It's a one-line thing in C-38 about the Coastal Trade Act.
Right.
But it has implications to the CNLOPB, how offshore projects are regulated.
Okay.
So my impression is that a full and thorough debate is hard to have when this issue comes up as one line in an omnibus bill.
I see. And Mr. Wright, you think that obviously you believe that with this inclusion in the bill, it certainly helps out for commercial activity. Is a necessity now? Because I know with seismic activity, the well spouts several years down the road, as it were.
So I think, again, the bill deals with the importation of seismic vessels, and the Offshore Petroleum Board is doing the regulation of the environmental effects. And in a full environmental assessment, they, in consultation with DFO, Coast Guard, etc. That won't change. That remains the same. It's just that the fact that the level of activity may rise if it's easier to bring foreign flag ships into Canada.
How much time do we have?
You have 30 seconds.
Oh, good Lord. I wanted to talk about the Investment Canada Act. Obviously, I'll throw it out to both guests here who spoke on it earlier. The transparency level in the Investment Canada Act is obviously, in your opinion, does not suffice. It's like at the back end. Do you feel that after a deal is made, you feel that the transparency is nowhere near where it should be? And I'd like to ask Mr. Bergevin and Mr. Weir to comment on that.
10 seconds.
Oh, go for it. 10 seconds.
So by its very nature, the Act is, a bit opaque, and it's very important for the public to know and potential investors to know the government's thinking on the Act, and releasing information about decision is like one of probably the best way to communicate to investors the details of different clauses that are used under the Act for the net benefit test. So I think it's of paramount importance to require that the minister releases information on his or her reasoning on decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Weir. Very briefly.
Yes, I think we need greater transparency about how the decisions are arrived at, and also the commitments that are made by foreign investors to achieve approval under the Act. And in addition to more transparency about the outcomes, I think we need a more open process to begin with, where workers and workers' organizations, including ones that might be affiliated to the New Democratic Party, have an opportunity to make some input to the process.
Thank you very much. Ms. McLeod.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I also would like to thank the witnesses for some great testimony here today. And I have to start, Mr. Steiner, you said something that I found was absolutely fascinating when you were talking about some of the challenges that you've had in the past. What I also heard you say is, in terms of the Exxon Valdez, how you actually solved that problem. So was that the actual quote, you'd solve the problem in terms of that issue. So can I tell you a little bit first and then maybe get your perspective? In this budget, absolutely the safe movement of oil tankers is really, really important to the government. So what we've included is some new regulations to enhance the existing tanker inspection regime by strengthening vessel inspection requirements. We created new regulatory frameworks related to oil spills and emergency preparedness and response. We've done a review of handling processes for oil products by an independent international panel of of experts, tanker safety experts. We put $35.7 million to further strengthen Canada's tanker safety regime and support responsible development and some additional things. So, again, I don't think anything can ever be absolutely 100% risk-free. But, these are, I would believe, very important measures that will minimize to the greatest degree possible in terms of the movement of tanker traffic. Would you agree with that?
It sounds, Madam, that everything you mentioned there is absolutely critical to reducing the environmental risk from tanker transport of hazardous substances such as oil. I would encourage the Government of Canada, and I think you have done this in many ways, to look at additional measures for prevention of tanker casualties, and that's where we got it right in Prince William Sound, Alaska, which is where I lived for 15 years, both before and during the Exxon Valdez oil spill. We put, and basically you look at the adequacy of the ship, and we made, in OPA 90, the double hull tanker requirement in the United States. I believe Canada, the IMO has done that globally. The adequacy of the crew and the adequacy of vessel traffic systems and monitoring. We have twin tug escorts escorting every laden tanker out to the ocean entrance. And there's many things that can be done to reduce the risk. You're right, we can't get it to zero, but we can get it down as low as possible by incorporating best available and safest technology. And I would encourage all of the entire committee to come visit us in Prince William Sound, Alaska, and see the tanker transport system that's in place there.
Actually, that sounds like a great idea. So thank you. I really appreciate, because I think it sounds like you have sort of really had to deal with it right up front and have sort of recognized that how much can be done to really mitigate it almost to nothing. The other, with the little bit of time I have left, I want to maybe focus in on Mr. Skinner. I was actually part of the Red Tape Reduction Commission that traveled across the country, and we heard a number of stories in terms of all sorts of issues that small businesses face, but certainly some of the issues that you're talking about today and that we've addressed in this bill. For the benefit of some of the people in the committee, can you actually give us specific examples? Because I was witness to specific examples of what was happening. So can you talk about a couple of products and maybe move the before and after so that the people that didn't get to hear those examples from folks that might resonate?
Sure. One of the most common ones that almost everybody would know about, it happens to be a natural health product. It's nicotine replacement therapy, so nicotine patches and gums. One of the things that this took years and years for the government to gather enough information about the safety, quality, and efficacy to make a decision as to whether it really needed to have a doctor's prescription each time or whether on lower doses it could be made available for consumer use. And just that switch alone, there's lots of data in Canada and elsewhere. The U.S. just did, in fact, a study on the economic impact. $2 billion net annual savings of the healthcare system because consumers can now use this product without having to go see a doctor. It reduces morbidity and mortality in terms of smoking, and chronic disease impact is incredible, and it's a strong public health outcome. If we had this measure in place at the time that natural health products like nicotine replacement therapies were going through, the consumers would have seen it 2 years earlier, the savings to the system would have accrued 2 years earlier, and it would have been a tremendous boon. I think the most recent data, just looking at 2011 healthcare costs, just taking simple ailments like the cold, common cold, that people say, it's a minor cold, but I still go see a doctor for it. If only 16% of those with a minor cold were actually to do something more for themselves, the savings cost would be enough to give 500,000 Canadians access to a primary care physician that they don't have right now.
Thank you.
So the impact of self-care is huge.
Thank you, Mr. Skinner. Thank you. Mr. Marsden.
I was just looking at the list here. We got fish, seeds, upset stomach meds, seismic oil exploration activity, and throwing in foreign takeovers.
Chair?
Pardon me?
Just a point of order, not to interrupt Mr. Marston. I wouldn't want to do that. I'm just wondering, are we scheduled to go till 9 tonight or 9:30? I noticed in my schedule it's until 9.
Going to finish the rotation with these witnesses.
So we're scheduled to go till 9 or 9:30?
We're scheduled to finish the rotation with these witnesses, and whenever we finish that up.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair, but when a notice goes out, it has specific time frames, and it doesn't say finishing the round of questions. It says a specific time, and I think mine says it goes until 9, and I was wondering if that is indeed the situation, or if you're requiring unanimous consent to continue, or indeed if there's a lot of questions. I'm just curious, Madam Chair, because my understanding of the system is we go until a specific time as scheduled.
I guess the confusion is we had a discussion with the chair whereby he said we would go through the rotation, but I guess that discussion didn't happen with others on the committee. So sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Just like to add, normal processes at committees, if we're interrupted by or delayed by votes in starting, we kind of add that on the end. Are we not going to do that?
Mr. Sims?
Can I make a motion to extend?
Okay. Motion to extend, yes.
I'll actually second the motion from Mr. Sims with the caveat that those who already have other appointments be free to leave and that there be no motions put before the committee should we not have the quorum, et cetera.
Yeah. Is that acceptable?
Those who want to stay can stay, but I can only stay till 9:30.
All those in favor? Opposed?
Oh, that doesn't happen
Thank
very
you.
often.
Thank you, Mr. Jane, for clarifying that.
I only used 3 seconds, right?
You used 11.
Oh, okay. Okay, Mr. Kingston, have you now or have you ever been a member of the NDP? I'm just kidding. Just kidding. I just couldn't resist that one. Look, we got to lighten up. But the problem here is we have a wealth of expertise here that we can't even begin to tap into, even when we're not squabbling amongst ourselves. Sir, the president of CFIA is going to have the power to issue licenses to external people. And Mr. Holmes, you might want to get in on this too. We're concerned, around what the impact that could have. Do you have a sense of the type of qualifications, for instance, that should be there, and if there's any evidence that they are there to protect our environment, our crops?
Well, I've actually, I'm also a certified lead auditor, ISO lead auditor, and I've actually helped develop many programs that would allow third parties to deliver. There's a required amount of oversight because the Canadian government stamp still goes on what happens. And the problem with CFI making these decisions in the context of cutbacks is they're designing programs and all they're doing is counting the bodies that they're removing and not counting the ones they'll need for the oversight. For example, in terms of not taking power away from the inspectors who were involved in that program, well, yeah, there is power being taken away from them because they're gone. They were all cut. And there is a requirement to do auditing and to check licenses and make sure they're appropriate, check the credentials of the people that are going to be delivering the service. They don't have the capacity to do that. That's the problem.
Sir, too, as well as institutional memory. I presume that the people cut because of contracts will be the junior people leaving?
That's not the way it works. There's no such thing as seniority.
Well, the reason I said that is my hope would have been that the junior people are kind of apprenticing with more senior folks in this particular skill, and if we're losing the expertise. But now you're telling me there's potential to lose frontline people.
Well, all the people that have been delivering this program are gone. The folks that are going to be taking it over as a third party are supposed to have a process in place. It's an accreditation program, and you build safety mechanisms into the monitoring process. There's not anybody to do that. That's the problem. Similar to the importer licensing program they're bringing in. They envision over 10,000 licensees. The only people that were doing specific monitoring of imports were people doing it for meat shipments, and they're gone as well. And in fact, CFIA senior executives posed the question, well, if we're not doing it for some other commodities, why should we do it for meat? So goodbye.
Again, sir, you say meat shipments, so we're having meat coming into the country, you mean, that's not going to be inspected? Are we going to be relying on the home country to inspect it for us?
Correct. Yeah, we already do that. And what we did was we targeted shipments to make sure that if we had bad actors that we could follow it up and increase surveillance. Those people that did that targeting and monitored the track records are history.
Mr. Holmes, would you like to respond?
Thank you for the opportunity. As I said in my remarks, we don't have a position against third-party delivery per se, but I think there's quite a strong onus in the regulatory support structure that comes after this act to actually put in place roles, responsibilities, oversight, enforcement, all of the actors that are involved, what form of accreditation or ISO they must meet in order to play that role, and specifically what they're there to do. And I think Mr. Kingston's points of maintenance and the funding to maintain the standards and the oversight system and the oversight and the enforcement efficacy of that are very essential in this.
Thank you. Mr. Kingston, I'd like to go back to you for a second. Are you aware of any analysis that was done in advance of these decisions?
I'm aware there was none done, and what made it difficult is, like many departments, most of the senior executives at CFI are not from that industry, and when they had to make these decisions, there was a process in place where they couldn't talk to anybody about it. So what has happened is most of the cuts that are being put in place for the sake of financial reasons, I can understand that, but the cuts that were planned were done in an information vacuum. We've asked for a meeting with the minister to talk about it. We do have a meeting planned with the president of CFIA to explain where some of the logical flaws are, because for example, in the areas of plant health and animal health, they've deregulated a lot of pests and said they're now established. So now they're getting rid of all the people that used to look after them.
Okay.
Do you think it's putting Canadians
Mr. Marsden,
at risk?
we are
Yes,
over time.
absolutely putting Canadians at risk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair.
We'll go to Mr. Van Kesteren, please.
Chair, thank you, everybody, for appearing and staying so long. I hope you aren't talking like we're talking about, scooting out for some reason. Mr. Kingston, I got a question, and I think I'm going to ask for an answer, and I'll ask the chair if it's appropriate, or if it's following procedure when I do this. But we have, I know in Ontario, and I think it'd probably be safe to say in Canada, we have an abattoir crisis, a small abattoir crisis, and the little guys tell me that they can no longer compete. There is so much red tape. There is so much. There's so many regulations that they have to follow. And I'm not going to sit here and suggest that we don't have safe. But the ironic thing is that the problems seem to crop up, and I think Maple Leaf is an example of that, in the larger abattoirs that can handle all the red tape. They have armies of people to help them with that, and so they can do what's required. The little guy just finally throws his hand up, and well, you know it. I guess the question that I wanted to ask, and I have to ask through the chair if that's appropriate, because we are actually asking you about the budget, but we are a government. We always are looking for solutions. You, as in your position, do you have some solutions maybe for this government? And I understand that some are not just, it's not just federal, there's provincial jurisdiction there as well too. And Chair, is that appropriate to ask for that so that we can have some?
That's appropriate.
Could you, and that's all I'm going to ask you, is to give this government some direction and to save the small abattoir. What we can do as a government, because it really is serious, because I know that, as I said, in my writing alone, I can think of about 3 right off the top of my head. There's probably more that have had to close. So maybe if you could do that for me. If I could shift, and maybe if I go to Mr. Steiner and to Mr. Zettel. Did I say that right? Zettel? Zettel. We're learning a lot about the oceans, and I don't think there's a person in this world that doesn't watch our nature programs and see those things and is shocked by some of the abuses that we've inflicted on the animals in the ocean. In a perfect world, would you allow seismic testing?
Is that to me, sir?
I'm going to give it to you both. So I'll let Mr. Zettel, since he's looking at me, then
Okay.
we'll switch over
I
to
have
Mr.
the
Steiner.
luxury of being present in the room. We all burn gas these days.
Yeah.
Many of us eat fish. Some of us go whale watching. So there has to be some kind of balance and compromise in my mind. I think we're stuck with offshore oil. And that means we're stuck with seismic surveys. So in a perfect world, I'd allow them, but I'd make sure they were regulated and constrained to operate in at times of, minimum impact, to operate in manners that caused minimum impact.
Mr. Steiner, you're up.
I would say, as a biologist, sir, in a perfect world, we would not allow seismic surveys in offshore marine ecosystems simply because these are extremely loud sound sources, 230 to 250 decibels, which is orders of magnitude louder than being a meter away from a 747 engine on takeoff, if you can imagine. These are extremely loud. They propagate for hundreds of kilometers. We know it has behavioral, physiological, and injurious effects to cetaceans, pinnipeds, birds, fish, etc. And so in a perfect world, we wouldn't. But I think my colleague, Professor Zadell, framed it correctly. This is not a perfect world. This is a real world, and that's the world the Canadian Parliament and government and the U.S. government is having to deal with. We use oil and gas. The question is, as consumers, the consumer is starting to ask, let's produce this product and explore for it and transport it and refine it and use it in as responsible a way as possible. And that means there are some areas that should be left off limits, and the highest, best available technology standards applied to where and how we do this. We're not there, quite frankly, either in the United States or in Canada.
I got just a suggestion to make, too, as I suggested to Mr. Kingston, too, and I hope we're doing that. I served on fisheries for a small period of time. We really need to have that collective agreement that you were talking about between our country and yours as well, too. So
Thank you, Mr. Van Kesteren. Monsieur Caron, s'il vous plaît.
It's hard for me to leave that witch hunt that we tended to go unanswered. Mr. Weir, you're an economist, right? What's your degree in?
I am, yes.
Yeah. What's your degree and where did you get it?
Well, I hold a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Regina, a Master of Arts from the University of Calgary, and a Master of Public Administration from Queen's University.
Thank you very much. And how long have you been working as an economist?
Well, I suppose I started working as an economist in 2005 after I graduated from Queen's.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Bergevin, vous êtes économiste également?
Mr. Bergevin, are you also an economist? From the University of Montreal, but I've been practicing for about 10 years. So I'm an economist as well from UQAM. Mr. Bergevin, to start my questions. Now, there was a motion which was passed in the House of Commons to the effect that we have to review the Investment Canada Act and what would be a net advantage for Canada. Now, are we asking the government to prove that it's not a net advantage for Canada? In other words, what are the conditions which mean that an investment is a net advantage for Canada? What would make it possible for the government to define this in a way that justifies their decisions? Reply. We are one of the few countries which has a test which is systematically applied to all investments past a certain minimum, $330 million, to ask whether an investment is positive for the Canadian economy. I don't think that's the right question to ask. What are the public policies which would encourage the government to intervene to block a transaction? The government has the latitude to intervene. I haven't a lot of time here, but what would be the conditions, public policy condition for the government to intervene? Reply. Well, a question of national security, question of culture, some state-owned entities.
Something. What would be your definition of a net benefit for Canada? Mr. Weir?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think the translation cut out or something there. My definition of a net benefit for Canada would certainly include a broad range of constituencies, including first and foremost the workers employed at the facilities being taken over. I think that is a really crucial component of net benefit.
Une autre question,
Another question for Mr. Bergevin. You are not necessarily in favor of using, well, take the example of U.S. Steel or Electromotive. Do you think it should be necessary for the government to proceed when the undertakings have not been respected? Well, promises were made to the government. These promises may not seem to be credible, but I think that's not the right way to pose the question. I think that we are one of the few countries which asks a company to provide us details on their plans for job creation through investment. We have very strict conditions, and putting some money aside as well makes the situation very heavy, very top-heavy. Mr. Weir, could you add something to this?
Sort of important to review these takeovers to make sure that they're beneficial to Canadians. I think a lot of other countries do have similar processes. Australia, for example, certainly has some regulations around foreign ownership. So I don't think there's anything especially unusual about what Canada does. And in fact, I would like to strengthen the process.
Mr. Adler, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I would like to direct my questions to Mr. Wright. Mr. Wright, I understand that there's currently no seismic capable vessels in Canada currently, and no company that's able to provide that service. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the number of vessels worldwide that could provide seismic data in Canada is roughly how many?
It's about 150 presently.
Okay. Okay. And they would be where exactly?
They scatter the globe, primarily concentrated in the North Sea, U.S. Gulf of Mexico, northwest slope of Australia, and Southeast Asia. And of that 150, right, they're built for certain purposes. So for any given survey, you may only have 10 or 15 vessels that might be pertinent to that type of acquisition, 2D versus 3D versus harsh environment, etc.
Okay, so amending the Coasting Trade Act is, in your opinion, a positive?
Yeah, that's correct. And part of the reason for that is it'll give companies vessel choice in terms of looking in a global marketplace for finding the best available technology. And also in some of the earlier comments raised in relation to the environment, some of these very modern boats are better for the environment as well in terms of their sound mitigation and so on. And that gives the operators a choice to look for vessels that could have less impact on the environment and meet their technological needs as well.
Who has the best technology right now in terms of building the seismic data vessels?
Which company?
Yeah.
I'd probably get in trouble if I said that. We deal with a lot of them, and
yeah. Okay. Well, so in what three countries would produce the best?
A lot of the technology
for Canadian purposes.
Yeah, sure. A lot of the technology that sort of we're using offshore Eastern Canada is coming out of Norway. A lot of similar kind of environment. Norwegians have historically been very progressive on technology development. They've used a lot of their oil revenues to funnel into technology that they're now exporting around the world.
Okay. And in terms of the potential for Canada to get into that business, what would you say? It's
in terms of having Canadian flag seismic boats that could be used around the world, it's a difficult proposition. In Norway, most of the vessels are not Norwegian flagged. They're flagged in different countries, around the world. So again, they import those foreign flag ships. The challenge we have in Canada is a limited acquisition season. So if you had a Canadian flag vessel, it could only be used for maybe 6 months, kind of in that May to October, November time frame. The winter months, the sea state is too high to use the vessel safely and to get good data quality. So then that vessel has to find work in other parts of the world. That's the challenge.
I see. So the barriers to entry are pretty high, you'd say, or?
Correct.
They are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. How much time do I have left, Chair?
You have a minute and a half.
And a half. Okay. Mr. Zadell, how do you feel about oil and gas development offshore?
Almost a political question.
No. Economic.
I have concerns.
Okay.
Sometimes I feel like we'll get to a point where we can no longer afford the risks. We're drilling in the Orphan Basin now. That's 2,000 meters deep in an area where icebergs occur. It's just upping the ante. How far are we prepared to go? I don't know. So I wouldn't say I'm not pro offshore oil development, and I monitor the industry, expressing my concerns about that. So I hope that answers the question.
It does. That's what I was expecting. Okay, Chair, that's I'm happy with that, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Monsieur May, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mr. Kingston, you actually, I'm reading an article, and my colleague mentioned that there will be some issues with respect to security. So with respect to health issues and how to protect consumers with this bill. Can you maybe expand on that and let us know whether or not we should be worried?
Well, there's many aspects of what's going on with this particular budget that may have and probably will affect consumers. For example, the question was asked in CFIA, if we're not doing something for all other products, why should we do it for meat? And that was monitoring and targeting problem suppliers. The answer was simple, except they presumed there was no answer, so they went on to just cut it. The answer is that meat is huge in volume and huge in risk. There is no food commodity that poses a more serious risk to humans than meat. It's as simple as that. So the program that was in place that's been now disbanded was never subject of consultation with anybody, nevertheless Canadian public. So there's one that puts Canadians at risk. The issue of label verification, and we're talking nutrition facts, etc. If you're in any way needing that information, if you're diabetic, if you're celiacs, you rely on that information for life and death decisions every day. Those programs are all being cut. And I've heard them say, well, no, they're not being cut. We're still doing that. If you talk to the inspectors, they haven't been doing it for 2 years. They were told to stop doing this 2 years ago, pending the evolution of this budget, which would can it forever. And, again, no subject of public debate. There are big concerns. I'm not sure that the people that made the decision understand what they decided on. In fact, I reported recently about totally conflicting viewpoints between the minister and senior executives in CFIA. And if what the minister said was correct, great, because he believed that these things weren't being touched. The senior executives of CFIA were going around the country telling all the staff the exact opposite as they were cutting them. So that's an issue. And that's one of the reasons why we asked for a meeting with the minister. I think he needs to know this stuff.
And when you mentioned the labeling issue, what's going to happen now with the bill? I mean,
it's buyer beware. There will be some policing of labels going on, but nothing like what did happen in the past. And the federal government has responsibility for label integrity and verification, and that goes right down to restaurant menus. And that program was also shelved about a year and a half ago. They were told at the time it was going to be reviewed and reintroduced, but instead they're now being told it's never coming back. So these do have implications for safety for Canadians, for sure.
So basically, with these cuts, there will be less security,
Correct.
less
Correct.
safety.
They're putting in more regulation, but they don't have anybody to enforce it.
So how many inspectors have they cut with this bill? Do you know around?
Well, right now there's about 100. In terms of total population, there was 310 so far. Some of them are different classifications, but they still monitor imports. Okay. And the other issue that they're talking about, in terms of the reason I say the regulation is better not being there than being there is because the good players, and there's many really good actors, including the small laboratories, by the way, and we do have a plan for that, they're penalized because what happens is they follow the regulations, but they see some of their competitors don't. And then it gets a reputation as a bad regulation, but really it's about bad enforcement.
Thank you very much. I just don't have a lot of time. Mr. Weir, just for the record, how many, so you do represent, you're here for United Steelworkers. How many members do you represent? Or how many members?
We have approximately 200,000 members in Canada, and we would have at least twice that many in the United States.
And just for the record, you are here on behalf of United Steelworkers?
Yes, absolutely. I consulted with our National Director for Canada, Ken Newman, and he asked me to present on behalf of the union.
Quickly, Mr. Bergevin, peut-être, yeah, very quickly, maybe I won't have time. You are charitable organizations. We've heard the Minister of Environment saying that charitable organizations are laundering money. Do you agree with that?
Well, there are perhaps some instances of that, but that's not a subject I'm very familiar with, so I prefer not to comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Glover, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et je veux...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank all our witnesses. As has already been said, we are tired, and it's clear that we've been working on this for many days.
It's kind of my job here. A couple of things that have been said by Mr. Kingston actually don't really portray the complete picture. For example, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has recently posted their annual update of staff numbers on their website. It shows clearly that there's been an increase of 32 people over the last year. And since 2006, when we took office, there's been an increase of 700 people. And just like quite often another party in this place says 750,000 net new jobs is a cut somehow in jobs in this country, the math does not add up. And I do have to correct Mr. Kingston because I think it's unfair when the whole picture is not portrayed. Federal CFIA inspectors were doing provincial inspections. And now they are being transferred to be provincial employees. That is not a cut, which is what Mr. Kingston is suggesting in his numbers. That is a transfer of responsibility. There has been no change other than the transfer of responsibility. The federal CFIA inspectors are now going to be provincial employees doing exactly the same job. That is not a cut. That is a transfer. Aside from that, there's also got to be consideration for the fact that the export food safety certificates that Mr. Kingston failed to explain are as a result of a deal between Canada and the United States where we have accredited inspectors who do exactly the same work, who do exactly the same monitoring, who are both accredited the same way, and they both issue those certificates. 100% of the imports on either side are done and inspected exactly the same way by qualified personnel. So it's unfortunately very misleading what Mr. Kingston has said. Having said all of that, I thought it was very, very important when he said, money is important. And so I want to remind Canadians, when it comes to the CFIA, $100 million was provided last budget for food safety, which unfortunately the opposition parties voted against. This year, there's an increase of $51 million for food safety. We already have indication that the opposition parties are going to be voting against that. So I did want to very clearly correct the record because it is not fair when only half the picture is portrayed. Now, I do want to talk about high-risk inspections as well, which is very important. When we're talking about meat, this government has done a lot of work to make sure that this is looked at. And when it comes to inspections, they are risk-based. That is how they are done. So a higher risk area, like meat, absolutely is going to have some clear and consistent and regular checking. So in every slaughterhouse, every single day in every slaughterhouse, there are inspectors. Every day. Not only that, inspectors were doing a check every day, and then a veterinarian was also duplicating to sign it off, which this government believes we ought to reduce some duplication. But we are going to ensure that those high-risk areas are continually monitored. Then we have the low-risk areas, like, for example, when we're talking about dried, processed, or canned foods, that kind of thing. Well, they probably don't require the same extent of inspection as the meat. So it's important that I clarify this because, you know, that's the problem with people who have outside interests. That's the problem with people who have outside interests. So I just ask that we be very clear about both sides of this story. And I think when we talk about third-party delivery, I appreciate Mr. Bergevin said, you know, he doesn't take issue with that as long as there are rules. The rules are there. The inspectors are accredited. There's no two ways about that. That is clear. I also want to correct the record with regards to the size of the budget bill. Let's give the facts. C10, which is budget 2009, the first budget bill there was bigger than this one. C9, budget 2010, BIA number 2, was 880 pages. C13, budget 2011, just last year. Budget BIA number 1 was 644 pages, all bigger than this one. This is not unusual in any way, shape, or form. These studies are done over years. One of the witnesses mentioned that. I just wanted to make that clear so Canadians understand some of the full picture on some of these issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Lover. Your time is unfortunately up. We'll go on.
I'm allowed to make comments or ask questions.
That is, it's every member's right to do that.
Thank you.
Mr. Jean, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for coming today. I just wanted to confirm a couple of things. Mr. Wright, I understand that the changes that you've come here to talk about in relation to the Coasting Trade Act has been long requested by the province of Newfoundland and Labrador and the Premier's office. I think for more than a decade they've been asking for these changes. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. So it's very popular in Newfoundland and Labrador.
It is.
Not very popular in Fort McMurray because now all the people are going to go back to Newfoundland and Labrador. I have to tell you
that would be great.
Yes. I think it's great too, to be honest. But it's great to have them in Alberta. It's really good to have a country where we can have workers go back and forth between all the provinces and work with Red Cell certification, and they can take lots of money back home, and I think that's awesome. I would like to ask a couple of questions of Mr. Steiner, or at least confirm some things with him. I had the opportunity to work on the Environment Committee here, and I also believed in a perfect world at one time, and I almost finished my master's in environmental law until reality got a hold of me and I ran out of money. I was planning on saving the world with things that I could do. And since that time, I've realized that the reality is that we can have responsible development and protect our environment and wildlife as well. And I want to let you know that from my time on the Transport Committee, I learned that Canada has, in my mind, the best laws in the world to protect tanker traffic. And I'd like you to comment on this after I tell you some of the things. The Canada Shipping Act, of course, is something that deals with it. We have 3 particular pieces of legislation that deal with it. Arctic Waters Pollution Prevention Act, the International Maritime Organization, which of course we're a signatory to, and we do have a requirement now that all large ships have to be double-hulled. And I know that Mr. Weir would appreciate that because of course they're made of steel and they take a lot more money and work and a lot more workers. But including the double-hulled requirement, I want you to know that we have mandatory pilotage zones, especially in the West Coast. We have professional pilots that are required to not only bring their own GPS and navigation systems, but their charts as well. And you know, of course, from what happened with Exxon Valdez, they had a broken radar for over a year, which is not acceptable. And I think even the United States in their new Oil Pollution Act of 1990 saw what took place there, and they've changed the laws tremendously. But I do want to tell you that we also require 2 tugs, front and back, a requirement of no more than 10 knots in certain areas. We have the strictest ballast laws in the world. We have a national oil spill preparedness with 4 different agencies that come forward in relation to response and required. We have a national aerial surveillance program that spots oil leaks, and also we have agencies that follow those oil leaks and arrest the ships if they be foreign or otherwise. We have a yearly annual inspection of domestic ships that is required, and also a port state control inspection of foreign ships, which has to be done yearly as well when they enter our area. So I just want to let you know that from my perspective, seeing that and my background would indicate to me that that would be one of the safest areas in the world to transport ships. Would you agree with me based on the information I've provided to you and Ms. McLeod has provided to you before? I mean, nothing's perfect.
Thank you for the question. I guess the devil is in the details. That all sounded very good. But I would simply caution that we thought we had a good system prior to Exxon Valdez for tanker shipment. However, there was complacency that came into the system, both within the industry and government, and that's a natural human tendency when you get some time between the last disaster and where you are. So
yes, and
we became complacent, all of us.
Yes, and I would agree with that.
Yeah.
But of course, the legislation's now, and the Exxon Valdez, with respect, they were half crew, they were fatigued, there was disciplinary issues in relation to the crew itself. It's a much different regime now. We require the pro pilots, we require them to have proper training. We have in essence, we have 1,200 tankers a year that go up and down the West Coast, of which on average about 2.8 a day, very little traffic, and in fact most areas control the amount of vessels that can go through. So I just want to assure you that we do have the best laws in the world in relation to our tanker traffic, and also our response regime is excellent.
If I could, one last comment on that. I commend you for that vigilance, and please don't lose it. And as good as you think it is, and as good as we think ours is in Prince William Sound, we have to remain vigilant to make sure that it stays as safe as possible and continue to improve it when we can. That's all I'd offer. And there are condensate tankers, for instance, calling at Kitimat now without tug escorts, and these could possibly cause a serious problem. So there are tankers calling in BC ports without tug escorts that I think it would be worth looking at.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jean. I just want to follow up with one brief question, and it is with respect to Division 38. And I think both Mr. Jean and Mr. Adler have done a good job in terms of identifying the positives of Division 38. And Mr. Steiner, I very much appreciate your respectful recommendations to our committee, and as well, Mr. Zadell, in terms of you don't oppose the division, but you're saying that we have to ensure that these vessels obviously adhere under very good Canadian guidelines. So I just perhaps a quick question to Mr. Wright. Mr. Steiner has proposed some things which Canada-U.S. Developing a bilateral agreement and negotiating a seismic mitigation protocol. My view that they'd almost be separate from this legislation, but they're things that the Canadian government could certainly pursue. Are you in favor of these, Mr. Wright?
Yeah, we would certainly support that. Anything we can learn collectively, internationally, would be to the benefit of all.
So the proposals by Mr. Steiner are fully acceptable to you?
Yeah, that would be fine. Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much. Just wanted to clarify that. I want to thank you all for being with us here tonight, especially for staying longer than expected. Thank our two guests by video conference. If you have anything further, submit it to the clerk, and we'll ensure all members get it. Thank you very much. Merci. Meeting adjourned.
Yeah, I know, Connie.